the business, and as we know, we're going to have the public session will be with Noel Buick, the Chief Inspector. Apologies. I have no apologies.
Pat Shane, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Funeral, he made me.
Okay, sorry, Chris. Yes, Pat. Okay. A couple of items in relation to Chair's business. The launch of the COIN website. And I don't know, Sean, are you plan to attend that? Are you content that I attend that as Chair? It's this afternoon. It's organised by the Newry and Moran Labour and Education Forum, and I was asked if I would go and launch the new careers website. I have to say, very innovative, and they've done a lot of very interesting work, and I think it's something we'll return to, particularly in relation to the inquiry that there will be in regards to the review of STEM and even careers. Great. Alignment of GCSEs. During the statement yesterday in the House, the Minister indicated that he was not minded to adopt the new grading system for GCSEs in England. There are students that are graded from 1 to 9 as opposed to the current system in Northern Ireland, A star to G. The Minister also referred to the continuing work of the Fundamental Review Expert Group. So I propose that we write to the Department seeking assurance that SIA is to work with other regulators to ensure that equivalence is maintained in respect of the different GCSE grading systems, and also propose that we seek the terms of reference for the continuing work of the expert group. I have to say on that issue, that element of the statement was steady as you go. It's interesting, the comments, I have to say, of the pupils that was interviewed, where you saw that on, I think it was Maggie Tyggart's report. It's interesting to see they raised some queries about the issue of modular and so on. But I think generally there was a teacher who in De La Salle, I think it was, and she had raised just a concern that maybe this wasn't maybe just the best thing to be doing. So, of course, there's always that difference of view, Chris.
What was the concern? Was it the concern that they were leaving it open to modular and linear, or the concern with modular?
I think it was the concern with modular, if I was picking it up right. But I think it was coming out when they interviewed some of the pupils. It was making sure that they were not in any way disadvantaged because England's doing something different, Scotland's doing something different, and Wales is doing something different. And I think that's what we just need to, and I think that's why the regulatory framework need to be absolutely sure those discussions are ongoing, and that in no way is our young people being in any way disadvantaged because of changes that are not their responsibility in other jurisdictions. So I thought it was an interesting comment, Danny.
I just want. It was interesting, but I still feel none of us know what's happening with Gove, and I'd like to get a briefing.
I don't think Gove even knows what's happening with Gove.
Somewhere we need to know what his changes are, because they affect so much of what we're doing.
Well, I think that's probably where the work of the regulators, and maybe if SIA could help us in terms of that might be useful. Robin?
No, I saw the programme you referred to, Chair. It was De La Salle. I thought there was obviously a concern there. I'm not sure if it was the principal or the head of the department.
Oh, maybe it was, yes. Apologies, yes.
But maybe, if this is the proper thing to do, maybe just ask the person who appeared on the programme, just maybe put a paper, or a paper's maybe too detailed, but to submit her concerns to you.
Okay. Trevor?
Yeah, I saw that wee piece. It was only a snapshot.
Yeah.
It was, yes, in fairness.
Although it's funny how pupils of that age can come up with the right comments, on the.
Obviously concerned about it.
I think but I would be more concerned if they had a greater intention of going across the water to university, but at the moment, with the cost differential, that's probably not going to be an option for some. But it's not a point well made. And I was asking the Minister on Monday the question about the exam boards and the facility to use boards from wherever, and I've often wondered, I know it's always has been the case, but what's the point of it? Why have a school from here, I think Methody have done it quite often, use the examinations provided by a board across the water? What does that say about our examinations? Something, and it seems you you can have a situation where a pupil have maybe done a maths exam based on our situation and the English or some other subject based on an English or a Welsh board. I think it's just confusing, unduly complicated. I'm surprised he didn't just tighten it a bit, you know.
Robin and then
No,
Sean.
just, Tyson, I mean, I think to say, you know, that it is only for going to university is to limit the potential of the pupil or the student's career choices. It may also be that the individual wishes to follow a professional course of study, which is not university-based, and you want to be assured that there are equivalences of.
Yeah, but that's right, but the board, the minister's comment was that as long as the let's call it the foreign board met the requirements of our curriculum,
Yeah.
well, that was the point.
But that has always been the case, and it's really around the specification of the exam.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's been nothing really that different in relation to that, in a sense.
So why do it?
It's choice. Sean?
The answer's simple, Trevor.
That's the sort I like.
It is simple, quite simple. That, you know, if in your class, in your maths class at GCSE, using the Northern Ireland syllabus, you get 3 A's, 15 B's and 10 C's, and you can go to London or go to some other board, and you get 12 A's or 15 A's. That is the main reason.
That's my unspoken comment. Oh, frankly, the only reason you would do it, school would do it, is because they think it's easier to get the good grades.
Because we're driven by results.
Yes.
Chris?
And Sean took the words right out of my mouth. It was just only to say as well that some schools actually internally use 2 different types. My
Yes.
history at school, the other class used the English board, whereas my class used the local board. So
Great
even
having somebody
internally in the
can
school,
remember.
you could do that. So,
Right. Okay. Right. Just one other issue, and that was the announcement members will be aware in relation to St Patrick's in Armagh, and that decision has been approved by the ministers to remain a grammar school, but is to discontinue the academic selection element. The department advised us in November that under the home to school transport policy, transport assistance is only provided to schools who have been unable to gain a place in a post-primary school of a preferred category within the 3 miles to their home. The categories in the grammar school are non-denominational and denominational. Now, I would propose, because we need just clarity on this issue. Remember, it was an issue that was raised in regards to Limavady, and there was concern that we write to the department to ask them to clarify the situation for a pupil living near St Patrick's who wishes to attend a Catholic selective grammar school. Will that student receive transport assistance, or will they be denied this as their nearest school is a grammar school? I know, and we're not getting into the debate about, you know, the rights and wrongs of selection. Or this is to see how is this going to play out, because we know Lurgan is a non-selective grammar. St Pat's is going to be a non-selective grammar. Does this have an implication in terms of the home to school regulations and the way in which that will be interpreted? I think it's only right that we have an understanding of how this will play out, because it was an issue raised. Yes, Coleraine and Limavady. Yep, Loreto and St Mary's made an issue about it, and it was raised.
It was raised in connection with another sector as well, Chairman.
Yes, it was. Yes, that's right. That's right, exactly. So, you happy enough to write to the department? Just clarify what the position is, and we'll know. Thank you. The draft minutes of the 5th of March are at pages 6 to 10. Can I just thank the Vice Chair for his help and assistance last week?
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Apologies I wasn't able to attend, as I had a couple of issues that arose in my own constituency which I had to deal with.
A quick meeting.
No. Thank you. Right, well, I have to say it was that quick a meeting that you ended up having to have another special meeting yesterday. So it says a lot about the quality or the quantity of the business that you carried out.
It's only because of lack of quorum you were.
So still my fault. Okay, matters arising. There's no matters arising. Yes, listen, Ellie. You'll find, members, the Department has advised us in its last programme for government an update on the second outline business case for the Lissanelli Shared Educational Campus. They provided all the information for us, and the clerk's briefing paper at pages 77 to 83 on the outline business case is available for members to see. Peter, do you want to just...
Yes, just briefly, members, it is a very, very long outline business case, 155 pages. I've done a covering note. Look, there's about 5 interesting facts, which I'll just tell members, they can decide whether they're interesting or not. Firstly, as members are probably aware, Phase 1 of Lissanelli is underway. This is site clearance and includes expenditure of £3.5 million to cover site contamination costs. That was a question the committee asked when we went in October 2012 about contam, so it's estimated at £3.5 million. In order to select the way forward, a number of options with a lot, a little or no sharing were considered. The consultants took the net present cost of each option and divided this by a qualitative score developed in some workshops. Although the qualitative score placed a lot of emphasis on access to the curriculum and other educational factors, the deciding factor when it came down to selecting the options turned out to be the level of sharing. So option 2, which involves all 6 schools locating to Lissanelli, has been selected. This involves shared teaching at key stages 4 and 5, but not key stage 3. This is termed medium sharing and is designed to protect the school's ethos, so the OBC says. Option 2 includes a shared school of making, which doesn't include the STEM facility, a school of performance, and the 2 of those together, the capital cost is £6.7 million. There's also to be a shared school of activity, so that's around PE and things, costing £5 million. There's to be a central kitchen, capital cost £800,000, a shared creche, a shared staff development facility. And there also appears to be a management cost over the 25-year life cycle of the project of about £9 million. But according to the OBC, there are no significant teaching cost savings associated with sharing. So whether they share or whether they don't, there aren't big or no financial savings set out in the report. ETI commented, as I indicated to you earlier, the rationale presented for keeping the Key Stage 3 facilities within the core schools and the benefits and potential outlined for sharing and enhancement between and across the schools at Key Stages 4 and 5 through the schools of making performance activity is sound. So there was an ETI are, as I said earlier, represented on the project board for Lissanelli. The OBC outline business case refers to the establishment of a joint campus management body, a conference of schools. However, it also indicates that there was some difficulty in getting the memorandums of understanding agreed. It appears to indicate that not all stakeholders were involved in the outline business case Mark II process, and that legally binding memorandums of agreement have not been developed. At one point in the document, it actually appears to indicate that the number of schools on the site haven't actually been agreed, but then later on it contradicts that. So I think it's safe to assume that yes, it has been agreed, and yes, it is option 2. Option 2 is to be progressed through a conventional procurement, design and build arrangement, with schools transferring to the new site on a phased basis over, I think, about 5 years. The consultants dismissed the use of the non-profit distributing PPP, as was used in Scotland. If members will recall, when we visited, I don't think it was Dalkeith, I think it was the first place we went to, not the second. Indeed, last week. They had this, they talked to us about this non-profit distributing model, which is this very clever model of PPP. They haven't used that because they're awaiting the outcome of a Treasury evaluation, and they've also cited difficulties in getting the agreement of all the partners. So their suggestion was that if you go in for a PPP, that would be quite tricky, because you would have to have all the partners on board for a very long period of time, whereas with a design and build arrangement, you get them built and then you will, I would guess, deal with the levels of sharing later on. So that was just some interesting points from that very lengthy document, Chair.
Okay, and that's very much appreciated. I think it gives us a reasonably good overview of the document. It's there for members to peruse, it's there for members. And I think maybe what we would do later on in the year is we'll get an update from maybe the board, the project board, in relation to Lissanelli when the department briefs the committee in the autumn on the progress towards the programme for government targets. So there is another issue that members should be aware of. Drumragh Integrated College wrote to us last week, and they wanted to meet members to discuss the school's exclusion from Lissanelli. Now, you'll be aware that there's a judicial review, and that judicial review is currently in relation to the development proposal at Drumragh. So that is a separate issue. So, as it's not directly related to the Lissanelli question, I'm happy that we would arrange an informal briefing as requested in the letter, and we'll make those arrangements, probably to do it in room 115, the way that we would normally do in occasions like that. Or do you want to do it at a full committee meeting? Trevor?
As long as we do it, Chairman, I don't mind.
Okay. Members, any preference one way or the other? Yeah, I'm happy either way, so if we could...
It's usually informal.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, is there any other comments in relation to any of that?
The judicial review hearing has finished.
Yeah, we're just waiting the...
Finished on Monday, I believe, or
Right.
might have been Friday.
Okay.
So we're just waiting for Judge Tracy.
Okay, thank you. Judge Tracy has been busy. he's been... he's getting busy, I can
People
tell.
tremble at his name.
Correspondence, and on this one we're doing not too bad. Pages 238 to 296 with 13 items provided under correspondence. The only one that I want to really comment on, a couple, is page 264. It's correspondence from the NALB on the budget-related matters. It appears to indicate that the savings delivery plan saving targets from the ELBs was missed last year, but the savings have been rolled out into 14-15. There was an interesting phrase in Shane's letter. Was it rebased? I think it was.
Yeah.
He used a phrase, and I thought it was interesting. Rebased, wasn't it? So I don't know what that exactly means as to whether or not. I think he's saying the department is written off the savings that were not made in 12-13, 13-14. So maybe we could just seek clarification from the department in relation to that. Okay, Danny.
It was on point 3, the Stranmanis College, in relation to the Western Education Library Board saying that the pool had been exhausted. Are we going to chase through to see what effect that has on the signature projects and whether they're going to expand?
They have expanded, Chair. That was what prompted the initial letter,
Yes.
is that they've moved from 2010 graduates to 2008 because they reckon the pool was
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Page 267, we have correspondence from the department regarding the independent review of home to school transport, and I would suggest that we write to the chair of the review seeking an interim findings briefing from the review team whenever that's available. Agreed? And are we happy that we dispose of the correspondence as per the covering letter, which is at page 238 to 239? Agreed? Okay, forward work programme, members. Page 298 to 301, the department has confirmed with the clerk that the Minister will brief the committee on the common funding formula scheme and on the education bill on the 9th of April. However, officials have indicated that, excuse me, that they expect the education bill briefing to be in private session. So I propose that we write to the Minister confirming the invitation and asking that the whole briefing be in public. See no reason why it shouldn't be. Now, if there's a specific reason why they want that element, then I'm happy. I'm not going to be precious, but I just don't want people to think that I have some reason as to why it's in private. That's not the case. If we're happy, that's the request that has been made. If we're happy that we accept that that's the case. Okay? Have enough? Right. You're aware that there is to be an expected extra plenary on Wednesday. We've sort of touched on that. It coincides with the meeting. So what we're proposing is we'll meet at 9:30 and that we take briefings on the teacher pension statutory rule and from the audit office on staff absence. And if the extra plenary takes place, we can finish then the meeting at 11. If it doesn't, we can then take the briefing from the department on the careers advice and STEM. So, happy enough that we work on that basis?
That's why, are we likely to have group meetings within our parties on the beginning before?
Probably Tuesday, I would assume.
We should be in Tuesday, but just if something's happened.
It's more like, yeah. Well, we'll just have to try and deal with that as members can let the clerk know as soon as we can.
9:30 here or in the sun?
And, yeah. Okay, in table items, the Assembly Education and Geological Survey have written to us advising of a STEM event in Parliament Buildings on the 19th of March in the morning. So we appear to be double or triply booked on that day. So we just unfortunately just have to note that correspondence.
It's in the Great Hall, members. I suppose if there's time between plenaries, you can come along and say hello, but I'd like no notice of that.
Okay, so then the next meeting would be provisionally 9:30 on Wednesday, the 19th of March in the Senate chamber. Thank you for your help in regards to that.
Shall we go?
Yes, if members happy to just go straight to the briefing. Okay, thank you.
Good way of doing it. Good way of doing it.
It is because some committees like to do it that way.
What's the order of questioning? What's the order?
Yes,
So it's
right.
Chris, Trevor, Robin, Jonathan, Joanne, Danny, Sean. Chris, you're near the end.
Right.
But again, if there's something, I'll try and manage it as we've.
No, okay.
Sean, are you for that thing? And
No, I can't go. I pack.
I have to be down there for that.
Thing on the 19th. I have a funny feeling I've been asked to speak at that.
The Geological Survey.
Right, okay, well, just confirm. Okay. Joanne, morning. Christina. Good morning. Well, good morning. Thank you again for taking the opportunity and the time to come and see us. And can I just say at the outset, Noel, we do appreciate the information that has been supplied to the committee over the period of the time that we've been conducting this inquiry. And I think that to date it has been profitable. I think it has been useful. It has generated, I trust, more light than just heat. And sometimes these things can create a bit of heat, but that should not be taken in any way, I trust, on a personal basis. None of this is personal. I would be the last person I would close anything like that down very quickly. It is a genuine attempt by the Education Committee to delve into a very important part of the educational provision that we have in Northern Ireland and to seek to be as much a help and not to be seen as a hindrance. So I trust that in that spirit that we will conduct our proceedings this morning. So I suppose, unless there's any opening comments, Noel, that you want to make, and then we'll go to questions.
Yes, if it's okay with you, Chair, I'd like to make some opening comments.
Yes.
About 10 minutes, is that okay?
Okay.
Yep, thank you very much. Well, formally, good morning, Chair and members of the committee. On behalf of my colleagues in ETI, thank you for this further opportunity to present to you our views on the work of the Inspectorate and the school improvement process. And we look forward to hearing your recommendations, particularly where the committee feels that they can add value and help us to be even better at promoting improvement in the interest of learners. As you know, the committee's already had 2 evidence sessions with the ETI so far. So I was just going to confine my comments today to some of the points that I wish to clarify from the evidence that you've already received. As agreed with the clerk, if there are any additional points to make, we'll submit these by the 20th of March. So every school, a good school, recognises that sustained improvement comes from within a school, and while inspection has an accountability and assurance role, it's primarily about promoting improvement. It's a catalyst for improving the quality of education for our young people through raising expectations and capacity building. And promoting improvement, you'll know, is one of the Cabinet Office's 10 key principles of best practice in relation to inspection. So how does ETI promote improvement? Well, the OECD study published in December during the time of this inquiry said 3 important things. The first of these is that there are well-established mechanisms for external school There are well-established mechanisms for external school evaluation, i.e. inspection. That inspection is based in quality assurance and emphasises school improvement. And that the framework for inspection is supported by international effectiveness research and is published and promoted for school use, which ensures transparency in the criteria that are used. Now, this is a very positive endorsement of ETI's inspection process from a review team of educational experts that included an expert from the Dutch Inspectorate and compared our performance with 26 other countries. ETI identifies practice which is good or better so that it can be shared. It identifies provision that is not good enough and needs to improve, and promotes capacity building, for example, by promoting the effective use of self-evaluation, which leads to improvement, and by involving the associate assessors in our work. The professional dialogue that we have with schools during inspection provides them with a focused improvement agenda, and ETI, through the follow-up inspection process, monitors the progress of the school in addressing the issues identified, as well as making an evaluation of whether the improvement has been effected for the benefit of learners. And as you know, in the case of the formal intervention schools, this improvement work is supported by CAS. Our reports enable schools to compare themselves with schools in similar circumstances and to consider best practice in similar schools while recognising that each school is unique. And in addition to the follow-up inspections, inspectors in their district role visit schools to directly observe practice, look at documentation and outcomes for pupils, and build a picture of the strength and areas for improvement. Surveys and dissemination of good practice events also highlight effective practice. And last week we held an event where 230 principals and teachers attended the event that included sessions delivered by schools identified through inspection as having best practice in English and mathematics. But there are schools that we have identified where practice is not good enough for our children. ETI have a moral as well as a professional duty to report that, and I appreciate that that is sometimes difficult for schools to hear. You've had evidence from schools in that situation, but I would ask the committee, and indeed the public, and including parents, would they want us to ignore provision that is not good enough, provision that is not serving our children well? We give difficult messages sensitively for the benefit of improving provision for our young people. The inspectors giving those difficult messages are those self-same district inspectors who are rightly held in high regard by many, including the committee. ETI's inspection leading to improvement tells us that nearly 70% of organisations improve at the follow-up inspection. 81% of the respondents to the NISA, that's the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Agency, post-inspection survey, state that the inspection process helped the organisation to plan for and effect improvement in outcomes for learners. And we also know that over 10,000 pupils have been attending schools that are less than satisfactory and are or were in the formal intervention process. And due to schools exiting the formal intervention process, nearly 5,000 pupils are now getting a better standard of education. Inspection has been a catalyst for these improvements, and the life chances of these young people are now so much better. And that really matters to those children and their parents. ETI have recognised that we need to work in even greater partnership with those that we inspect. We know that we can have the greatest impact on pupils' learning and achievement when we work successfully with schools, particularly school leaders. ETI has a long history of being a continuously improving organisation, from sharing inspection criteria from Together Towards Improvement in 2003, which was revised in 2010, to the introduction of the proportionate risk-based model of inspection in 2010, and now into our current developments. And the current developments that I'm going to outline have not been as a result of the inquiry, but rather have been in train since 2011.
I'm glad for that clarification.
Since September 2013, we have reduced the notice period to 2 weeks, taking out some of the anxiety for teachers, and we now engage with teachers immediately after observing a lesson on all school inspections. In primary, we used to wait until the end of the inspection, and we feed back the findings of the inspection within a week so that schools are not kept waiting over the weekend. We are now holding most of our moderation meetings in the school with the intention from September 2014 of involving the organisation leaders more in our team meetings and moderation meetings, so that they are very clear about why we've come to the conclusions that we've come to, and to help them to be more effective in effecting improvements. We have a stronger focus on self-evaluation, and it's at the heart of the new post-primary model. We no longer ask schools to fill out a self-evaluation pro forma. We use their own self-evaluation. And we have the development of the Sustaining Improvement one-day inspection that enables very good and outstanding schools to demonstrate their continued capacity for self-improvement. This year we're piloting the use of the running record, which is broadly the evidence base for the inspection, with a view to sharing that in more detail with the school. and we've revised our inspection reports to be sharper and more accessible. Last week we completed training for associate assessors that had been planned over a year ago, and that was how to hold discussions with teachers after lesson observations and to help them to observe and evaluate aspects of an organisation's work. And this will further help them in their own schools and enable them to play a fuller role in inspection. We're also beginning to draft an inspection handbook, and this will be for each phase. It will bring together the guidance for each phase that we already have in place and develop it further, including the criteria against which we make our evaluations. We're also in the process of looking at performance levels and have drafted some of the statements, which are statements rather than one word as we use now, and we've shared those in broad terms with the teaching unions and with the associate assessors. So the 10th principle of best practice in inspection is that inspectors should continually learn from experience in order to become increasingly effective. These developments that I've just referred to build on the good practice already in place in ETI and are outlined in our corporate plan and monitored through our operational plan. We have very good links with inspectorates internationally through the Standing International Conference of Inspectorates, SICI, and with inspectorates in other jurisdictions. We're currently involved with inspector exchanges in the South, Wales and Scotland, and in fact Heather has just come back from doing an exchange in Scotland and has confirmed what we already know, that our inspection practices are already very similar to those in Scotland and other jurisdictions. Our work is about improving the lives and the life chances of our children, and I care passionately that every child has the best possible chance of a good education. We have been accused of showing social bias, but in fact there are schools in socially deprived areas that are not good enough. However, we also have examples of schools in exactly the same socio-economic circumstances where the inspection outcomes are good or better. The context of a school is key. Good schools have their context well documented and verified in their school development plan based on robust self-evaluation. The principal, staff and governors outline the context of the school in their interaction with the inspection team. And with the information that ETI already has, we are well informed about the context of the schools that we inspect. ETI uses a broad range of information to inform us about the school's context. We use outcomes, attendance data that's benchmarked with schools in similar circumstances, enrolments, numbers of pupils on free school meals and with special educational needs. We have inspectors' district information, and in post-primary we have the levels of pupil on entry. But it's incumbent on the school to make the context clear. Inspection is not a one-dimensional activity. Schools have their part to play too. A further principle of best practice in inspection is a focus on outcomes, and I make no apology for focusing on pupils' outcomes. The 5 A-star to C, including English and mathematics, are programmed for government targets set by the executive. But more importantly, they reflect the life chances of young people. Employers want literate and numerate employees. Within the Together Towards Improvement framework that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, there are 16 quality indicators on achievements and standards, and only one of those refers to data, and that's about achieving in line with benchmarking data. Inspectors use the data to engage in discussions about where the school can demonstrate added value and how they address underachievement and low achievement. OECD state that ETI takes information and data from a range of stakeholders and through direct observation. They state that it's these multiple perspectives which helps increase the objectivity in evaluation results. School inspections are not determined by data. Inspectors make judgments based on all the evidence available and spend time observing, learning and teaching in classrooms, looking at children's work and talking to pupils and teachers. The committee has had a lot of feedback on value added, and I'm sure has taken cognizance of the words of caution from the educationalists like Sir Bob Salisbury, Professor Gardner and the OECD, who say that value-added models must be treated with caution. A mathematical calculation for value added based on questionable principles can lead to entrenchment of low expectations and skewed views of schools, for example, as described by Professor Gardner. Schools have a responsibility for demonstrating to the inspection team that they add value. Good schools can do that, but if they don't know, how can they say inspection didn't take it into account? Pupils' progress relative to their starting points is the most important driver of a judgment on achievement and standards. It can override absolute outcomes where it is demonstrated clearly by the school that pupils are making progress and the school is adding value to that pupil. Every inspection report is written after a full and frank, robust discussion of the moderation conference, and that's conducted immediately at the end of the evidence gathering in the school. On many inspection teams, as you know, there's an associate assessor who brings an important external perspective to the challenge process and complements inspectors' experience. The moderation meeting ensures that all evidence has been picked up for the various team members is challenged, moderated and discussed, and that findings are collective and secure. A key element when coming to an overall evaluation is the extensive experience of members of the inspection team who will have visited many schools working in a range of contexts. And it's this experience combined with the wide range of evidence presented by the school that contributes to the overall judgments made by an inspection team. We in ETI are foremost about promoting improvement in the interest of all learners, not only children, pupils and young people, but also teachers, leaders and not least ourselves in ETI. So that concludes what I wish to say, and I look forward to hearing your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Just one very quick query. Associate assessors, are they paid or do they just receive expenses?
We provide substitute cover for the school. We don't pay associate assessors directly, but we do provide substitute cover for the school and expenses.
Okay. In the handbook, which is, I suppose, general to in relation to inspectors and the associate inspectors, it talks about the core values of honesty coupled with openness. And openness, obviously, is very key to the process, so that everybody involved in the process is well aware of what's being required of them, what's being asked of them, and the process in which they're involved in. When it comes to some of the correspondence that we have received, one very worrying element of that was from the NIPSA representatives when, in their written submission, and I'm sure you've seen a comment, one which is, I have to say, greatly perturbed me and I think other members of the committee. When in that particular document they make reference to, and I quote, inspectors who conduct the inspection need greater assurances about the finality of their decisions and the fact that evaluations may not be overturned from anywhere outside the original inspection team. Mm-hmm. And I have had difficulty getting a clear understanding of where is that coming from, who is it that would overturn the evaluations of the inspection team other than those who are involved in the inspection?
Well, everybody in ETI is involved in inspection. That's the first thing that I would say. And we, like any good organisation, have a quality assurance process to help us ensure as well as demonstrate consistency in all of our work. So you will have the moderation meeting that I've just discussed as part of the quality assurance process, but there are also a number of checks and balances in the system before the moderation meeting and after the moderation meeting, so that we have challenge at various levels. So, as I said, the moderation meeting, we have the MI may provide challenge if it's not clear, clearly written in the report why a judgment has been arrived at. The challenge might come from the Assistant Chief Inspector, and indeed it might come from myself, but always in consultation with the reporting inspector. You know, we clearly state that the feedback to the school that inspection performance levels are provisional, subject to moderation through ETI's quality assurance processes, and are not final until the report is published. You know, consistency has been raised by raised as an issue by some of the stakeholders that have submitted evidence to the committee, and this quality assurance process is about ensuring and demonstrating consistency within the inspection process. There's no external interference from the department or anyone else in our evaluations, but we have a quality assurance system, and if we need to use it, we will use it.
So whenever they use that phrase, anywhere outside the original inspection team, are they then not aware of the quality assurance measures which includes everybody in ETI. So, is there a misunderstanding on their part in terms of those that wrote this document as to the process that's used? Because clearly, if they and these were members who represent the inspectors, the district inspector, if they are saying that they have a concern about it being overturned anywhere outside the original inspection team, you'd have to conclude then that they're not aware of this process of quality assurance, in that the report is only an interim report because it has to be handed over by the reporting inspector to ETI at a senior management level. We go through a number of checks and balances, which can be all verified and everybody knows what they are, and then we end up with a final report. Why would they come to a conclusion that there's somehow outside interference, for want of a better word, in their evaluation and assessment of a particular school?
I don't know. That wasn't shared with me beforehand, so I can only surmise, what they mean, as you are surmising. But what I'm telling you is that we have got a quality assurance process, and I think all of you are involved in aspects of business and work where you would expect to have a quality assurance process that has checks and balances in it to ensure consistency, and we have that too. And, that is feedback to those people who perhaps feel that we haven't got consistency in our judgments, and in fact we have got a robust quality assurance process to ensure consistency.
Would the feedback to the school, the first feedback to the school before the final report is given, could that, and I think it has in some cases, been the practice whereby a school has been made aware of the informal feedback, but when the final report comes to them, it was nowhere near resembling what they had been told in the informal, and that leads to a concern that the openness that is desired in terms of the handbook is not as open as everybody says that really is. And why would that contradiction be there in the first place?
I'm not aware of any circumstances where that has happened. No overall effectiveness grades have been changed through the moderation process as part of my time as Chief Inspector. But what I'm saying to you is we have got those checks and balances in the system, and I think they're important to ensure and demonstrate consistency.
Danny?
I just wanted to come in on the back of it, Noel. When you talked about the moderation meeting and then you sit down and just go through your quality assurance, does anyone ever go back to the school for a second moderation meeting? Because if you're going to change maybe what they feel that the report is going in a certain direction, and then sit down and change it, does anyone go back and discuss it with them?
Well, as I demonstrated, that hasn't happened. So we have all of our, any quality assurance conversations we have with the reporting inspector and ideally with the deputy reporting inspector. So if there was a change, yes, absolutely, the reporting inspector would go back to the school.
Okay, thank you.
Just finally from me, Noel, why has the work in practice become more prevalent now that district inspectors are no longer part of the inspection team? What's the rationale?
Actually accurate.
Well, certainly, Noel, in terms of the discussions that we have had, it's very clear, and other members can confirm so that I'm not putting a particular spin on this. What we were being told was that the practice now, not in the past, but the practice now is more often that the district inspector is not part of the inspection team. And is that the case or is it not?
Right, I will clarify to you the position regarding the district inspector. The district inspector is no longer the reporting inspector, and we had been moving towards that situation sort of over the past year. And that is really so that we can demonstrate objectivity, and best international practice says that we should be able to demonstrate that objectivity. It leaves it clear for the district inspector to be able to have those challenging but supportive conversations with the school to provide advice if that is what is required. But then when the school is inspected, they are not the reporting inspector. Essentially, I suppose you could say, coming back to inspect their own support, advice and challenge that they have given. So that is the only change that has been made. I would ideally like the district inspector to be part of the inspection team, and that is our rationale, if you like. But the reality is we have had a lot of feedback from inspectors, and some of it justified absolutely, around the equity of workload. And if you insist that the district inspector is the reporting inspector, then your workload is dependent on the number of inspections that are being carried out in your district. So that is one thing that we've had to take into account. Also, if the district inspector is the reporting inspector for all of the schools in their district, that means that those inspection outcomes are attributed to one individual and not to the corporate ETI. So those are the reasons for the changes. But in terms of the district inspector being a member of the inspection team, that will happen where it's possible, but it isn't always possible if we're to balance that with equity of workload and other priorities in the inspection schedule.
But there is a difference, Noel, between being the reporting inspector and being part of the inspection team.
But there's no issue with the district inspector being part of the inspection team. In fact, that would be my preference, is that they are. But what I'm saying, it's not always feasible when you balance up all the different sort of competing priorities.
So what is the main reason for this change over the last year? Is it the issue of objectivity, or is it the issue of equity of workload?
It's a combination of both of those things.
And if it is a combination of those, are you then saying that district inspectors have not been objective, are not capable of being objective? Because certainly, and I have to say this, from having met a large number of the district inspectors, I find them to be people of the highest integrity, people who have a very genuine interest in ensuring that there's no whitewash, there's no cover-up, there's no sort of cosy relationship between them and their school, and that they're there to do a very professional job. And I feel that we have done a disservice to the system by creating a distance between the district inspector, the inspection process, and the schools for which they have, for want of a better word, a pastoral care and responsibility for.
I'm sure you would agree that we need to be able to demonstrate objectivity, and the even perception that we would be going back to inspect our own challenge, support and advice would be something that wouldn't stand up to scrutiny in other aspects of the scrutiny of our work. So it is important that we demonstrate objectivity. I think that is fundamentally important. But as I say, having the district inspector on the team, yes, I absolutely agree that that is the best practice principle that we could subscribe to. But there are issues with that around equity of workload. And, you know, we said that we would review the position at the end of this year. And really, inspectors probably will have to make a decision about what is the most important. You know, is it being the district inspector being the reporting inspector, or is it to do with equity of workload? But for me, there's a corporate responsibility for making sure that the inspection outcomes in a particular district aren't attached to one individual, that they are attached to the corporate ETI. And for me, that is sort of a fundamental issue that I feel is important.
Sean?
Thanks. And I have to agree with the comments about the district inspector and so on. But you did say there, just, well, that inspection, we'll have to make a decision at the end of this year. But when we spoke to district inspectors, and you talk about the context, and the context is so important in terms of the documentation, but surely the district inspector is the best source of the context. Will it be, when you say, will the inspectors will make a decision, will it not be senior management within the inspector will make that decision? Because, you know, we are told that they only have 3 or 4 days per term actually do their district inspector work, and they just can't physically do it. Well, if we're going to take the whole picture, a holistic picture of a school and so on, do district inspectors not need, should that not be a priority, that they have actually time to do their district inspector role as well?
Well, we have, like all organisations, competing priorities. On the one hand, we have parents groups saying we don't carry out enough inspection. On the other hand, you know, we have to manage the amount of time that we can give to our district inspector work. So it is always a balancing of reducing resources, in fact. But in terms of the review of the role of the District Inspector, it will be a joint conversation. But yes, ultimately, senior managers and myself as Chief Inspector will make that decision. And I come back to the point that it's important that we're able to demonstrate objectivity. In terms of time allocated to District Inspector work, we've also worked very hard to ensure some equity in that. And I think we gave a submission to you about how the work is allocated to the District Inspector role. But on balance, about 14% of our inspection days is allocated to district work. And in previous years, interim follow-up inspections and follow-up inspections were part of the District Inspector's work. We've taken those out now and put them into the centrally scheduled programme of activity. But if you were to take that into account, the work that District Inspectors are involved in, including interim follow-up inspections and follow-up inspections, is about 21% of our inspection days. Now, that is quite considerable, and ideally we'd like to give more time to that, but that is the reality of the resource, the budget envelope that we're dealing with. In terms of making provision for the District Inspector not being the reporting inspector, we now have pre-inspection days allocated, so that they have an opportunity to understand the context of the school, visit the school if that's possible, to find out more about the school before the inspection starts. And we also have a robust internal management system. So whenever a District Inspector goes to visit a school, they complete a MARS report. You'll have heard of our Management Information System. And those MARS reports with the details of those visits are available to the reporting inspector. So we have got opportunities in place for the reporting inspector to familiarise themselves with the context of the school. And also, Northern Ireland is not a very big place, and we are not a very big organisation. We have a lot of conversations internally about schools, so there is a lot of intelligence available to the reporting inspector.
Just clarify one point, and that is, would it be the equivalent of 3 or 4 days per term that the District Inspector would have to carry out their District Inspector role? I don't question it at all whatsoever in terms of the District Inspector not being the report inspector, absolutely not. But would it 3 or 4 days per term on average to carry out their District Inspector role?
That probably is about right. There are 10 days allocated in the submission that we sent to you. There are 10 days allocated per year for each district that a District Inspector is responsible for. But it may be that they're a District Inspector for a number of different types of schools. You might be a District Inspector for special schools and also for post-primary. In that case, they would get 20 days. If they're involved in leading a subject area, the principal inspectors of maths and English get 10 days to carry out that work. Specialist inspectors get 5 days to carry out that work, which is also incorporated into the District Inspector time, because that's where they carry out that activity. So that's how we allocate the time, but the submission that we sent will give you chapter and verse on that.
Okay. Thank you. Chris?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Noel, for the presentation so far. You've probably seen from various reports and Hansards of our meetings that we've had some very interesting discussions around the role of ETI. The foresight, the plans, is it inspection, is it audit, is it school improvement? You've no doubt seen Professor Gardner's words from last week around the marrying of the two ideas. Just wondering, in your own opinion, what do you think the balance should be? And in particular, perhaps, we've looked at various other models where it's not so much maybe about the individual school setting, but the wider education system. I'm wondering, in your own opinion, where is the balance there? And where we are very heavy here in inspecting the local school, the individual school setting, and not so much the wider system as a whole, where do you think the balance should be, or where's the best use of your resources?
Well, our mission is promoting improvement in the interests of learners, so we see our role absolutely as doing exactly that, promoting improvement. But there's no doubt that we also have an accountability role. The Chief Inspector's report gives a State of the Nation view about how the education system is performing, and we're due to have another report this October. We also have an assurance role, demonstrating to parents that their children are getting a good quality education. So we have an accountability and an insurance role, but I see our prime role as promoting improvement through the inspection process. As I described, we identify where there are strengths, where there is good practice, so that can be shared. We identify areas for improvement so that improvements can be made. And in addition, through what I think is a highly regarded process, our follow-up process, the inspectors carry out interim follow-up inspection visits to check that progress has been made in making those improvements, and then we have the follow-up inspection to confirm whether those improvements have been effected or not. So I think that sequence of events, from identifying what the areas for improvement are to checking that they have been effected, I think demonstrates that promoting improvement is fundamentally what we are all about.
I think it does raise a very interesting question, and it is one I think that is worth consideration. And obviously you visited Scotland, and Heather has been to Scotland, and obviously they have a very different approach to sampling the education system. And I think everything, I suppose, is of its time. In 2010 we agreed with the approval of the DE board that we would introduce proportionate risk-based inspection, and that was really designed to address the inspection of each individual institution and ensure that that was done over a significant period of time. We're commissioned by the three departments, by DE, by DCAL and DALE. So DE commissions 70% of our time, and that commissioning process has asked us to look and to spend a significant amount of time on individual institution inspection. We have about 10 to 15% of the time which is flexible for us to use and allocate as we see it, and that's where we would undertake our thematic inspections, and obviously over the past we've looked at area-based inspections also. So there was a point where we were doing so much thematic work that actually we weren't getting the same concentration on schools, and that was why we introduced the proportionate risk-based strategy. That doesn't mean that there isn't always a better way of balancing the two, and I suppose as we become more sophisticated in our processes and in our planning, you would like to think that we would continue then to achieve that better balance, because I think there are arguments for both, and we're in a situation at the moment where the requirement on us is to carry out individual organisation inspections. That's not to say that we're not trialling other approaches, and we can see the benefits of some of those other approaches. But it's difficult to change that focus entirely unless that is a system-wide decision, in the sense that that would come from the department and from the minister. And certainly we would be open, I think, to any of those different options really within that. But at the same time, we are right in the middle of a particular strategy at the moment. So I think it would be difficult to change it without, in a sense, losing as much as you would gain just at this particular point in time, because we are seeing, we are covering the individual organisations in the process of this year, and Noel made reference to it. We're going back to schools where the provision was outstanding or very good, that were inspected in the last 3 years. We trialled that last year with a small number of primary schools, and that was highly successful, to look at actually how our schools sustaining that improvement, but giving them that endorsement as well too, that they're not waiting for 7 years for someone to tell them that they're still doing an outstanding job. Where we're going to move to with that is also to involve our associate assessors in that process, so that again they can go back to schools that they visited previously and see how things have changed in the interim, or indeed how outstanding practice continues to get even better, I think, at that point.
I think it's probably fair to say that you yourselves seem confident and assured in the balance, but at various, I think I'm right in saying through our discussions, at various levels in your organisation, in the system as a whole, and I think the wider education and community, there isn't the same confidence and shared vision of the balance. Is that fair to say? And if that is, what can be done?
I mean, I would want... Sorry, Stephen, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that is fair to say. I think one of the most significant learning points for me in the course of this, aside from the recommendations that you'll make, is what Professor Gardner said last week, which is about our communication with the system and how that needs to be more effective than it has been. I mean, he made the point, we can say to you, and we will say to you, that we need more resources at any point in time, but he did make the point that also you have got to make better use of the resources that you have. at any given point in time. And certainly, after last week, John, Heather and I were working with the Associate Assessors on Friday, and one of the comments, we weren't talking about this, we were actually talking about school leadership, and one of the comments in the group that I was chairing actually at that meeting did make me think again about what Professor Gardner said, insofar as there was a principal who said actually you become a principal and you have to go through an inspection process where you're supporting all of your staff, and particularly in a big school, and yet you haven't, as part of your training to be a principal, been given any kind of direction on how the inspection process actually works. And I don't mean even from us, but I mean as part of that whole training. So therefore you're coming to it almost cold. And as Noel said, obviously our reporting inspectors visit the school, they spend a day in the school and they brief the school. But I suppose what that principal was saying, that was almost too late at that point in time, you know, for the principal to really, as a first-time principal in particular, to get up to speed with an understanding of that. So I think that it is fair to say, as Professor Gardner did, that we need to look at our communication and we need to look at ensuring that people, I think you could also say that, as Noel has pointed out, we have a huge amount of documentation. It's probably overwhelming for people, truth be told, to expect people to deal with all of that on their own, and perhaps it is that face-to-face interaction with people that we really need, and which, when we do get the opportunity to do that, we find it successful, I think, as do the people who participate. And we had 220 principals last Wednesday actually at the Dissemination of Good Practice event for literacy and numeracy, and each one of those events, I think people do feel that in listening to their colleagues, aside from listening to us, that they do feel they are learning from that process. But it is, I suppose, up to us to try and improve that communication. So I think it is a valid point.
And even if we take the individual school setting, and again go back to the idea of balance, where is the appropriate balance between auditing a school's compliance with DE policy and the school improvement, to foster improvement, and foster that improvement? Where do you think the balance is there? Do you have the balance right? Or again, what can be done maybe to strike the right balance?
I'll ask John to come in a moment, but there are some compliance aspects of inspection around, for example, the school development plan, safeguarding. Those, you know, are among some of the compliance issues that we must look at. But in general, what we're looking at is the quality of education that children and young people get. So we're looking at achievement and standards, teaching and learning, and quality of provision. And I think we do check the compliance bits because we have a statutory responsibility to do that. But our balance is absolutely on looking at the quality of education and training that young people are getting, and promoting improvement in that. John, did I
would hope that the balance would be evident in any post-primary inspection report that you read. So we explain to the school that if they are, just to remind them that the main focus on promoting improvement is around the quality indicators that we have in Together Towards Improvement. We report what we find in the school in terms of their effectiveness or their lack of effectiveness or lack of consistency in providing, in the quality of their provision in any aspect of Together Towards Improvement that we inspect. In addition to that, as Noel indicates, there are certainly the government asks us to report attention to a couple of those, child protection, for example. We're always asked to report on the school's progress against the Programme for Government targets for GCSE and A-level. We're always asked to report on the school's progress towards delivering the entitlement framework, which is being phased in to finalise over the next 2 years. We're always asked, and more recently we've been asked to report by the Minister on the school's quality and effectiveness of its careers provision. He asked us to do that. And he also asked us to report more precisely on the extent to which the governors provide both challenge and support to the school. And that's not quite everything, but it's almost everything. We always report on the effectiveness of the provision for pupils with special education needs. So you would find those in the report. But if I take one example, and that is the department does expect us to report on the extent to which the school is compliant with, and that is the word, the departmental regulations on school development planning. And we will always have a footnote in the report that discharges that. You know, the school development plan is compliant or is not fully compliant with. But within the body of the report, what you will find is that what we're reporting is not so much that they comply to a certain regulation checklist, but actually how effective their process of school development planning and improvement is, as we discussed at the last evidence we gave you a fortnight ago. So that gives you a sense of how we manage the balance between those things that certain policy branches in the department want to read from our reports, as well as trying to give the school as much as we can in support towards improvement. But I would have to say, when the report seeks that balance, the main input that we can give to the school on contributing to their capacity building for improvement, how getting better at it, is in the dialogue that goes on during the visits, not just for the inspection visit, but previously by the DI and by the DI who might follow it up in terms of a follow-up inspection or continuing monitoring or whatever is necessary, depending on the outcome of the inspection report. So that's how we try to achieve that balance.
Okay.
I think it would be useful, just you raised an important point. The district inspector picks up the follow-up inspection process, so that if a school is satisfactory or less, then the district inspector undertakes the interim follow-up visits and the follow-up inspection.
I think the other thing Noelle made reference to was what she described as a running record. And that's something that we're working on at the moment, which is to try and collate together all of the evidence that we collect in the course of the inspection, and which currently the school wouldn't have unless they made an FOI request, for example. But it's to collate that in a way that will be professionally productive for the school subsequent to the inspection. Certainly in the course of either primary or post-primary inspections, when an inspector has responsibility for a particular area, for me it would be English and drama, for example, in a school, then you have extremely detailed professional discussions which are not captured in writing, but you have very detailed professional discussions with your colleague in the school who has responsibility for that area. And those are the areas, actually, we learn very often as much from those discussions as the person who's in receipt of the inspection at that stage in time. But there isn't a way always, I suppose, in which those are fed back then in detail to the school in terms of in a written format. And I suppose that the busyness of an inspection in the course of a week like that can mean that someone will have found the discussion very valuable, but almost has forgotten some of the detail of that because it has gone through in such a quick period of time. So we're trying to look at providing as much detail as we can in school about the actual process of inspection that took place in the course of the 3 days that we've been there. We don't want to give that to people until we're content that we're confident in doing it either, because I think, we have to give people information that our colleagues are confident about preparing and about sharing then subsequently, and in a way in which is productive for the school.
Okay. Just one final question, Chair, on the improvement side of things. I know previously ETI have contended that since 2010, the vast majority, like 80% or all of schools that have been re-inspected have improved by at least one performance indicator. What contribution do you feel ETI has made to that improvement?
Well, I hope I articulated some of that in the opening introduction. But what we do is we are identifying what a school does well and what it needs to improve. And then through the follow-up process, if they are satisfactory or below, supporting schools through the challenge of the interim follow-up visits to make sure that progress is being made, and then finally evaluating that through the follow-up inspection visit. But we don't do that alone. We are a catalyst for improvement, as I said at the very beginning. Schools that are in the formal intervention process obviously get CAS support. And there's other support that principals get themselves through the area learning communities. But ultimately, school improvement happens within the school. For it to be sustainable, it has to be a process within the school, and it has to be continuous. But I think we provide that catalyst for improvement.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Trevor.
Thanks, Chairman. Morning. I wanted to ask you about the external evaluation of your own effectiveness. The survey that you point us to is in ISRA, one every year, and fair enough, it's just very complimentary. That's a figure of 81% improvement and so on. But it's not the only review of your performance, and I'm looking at the GTCNI survey where, it's fair to say the two surveys don't quite marry up. I mean, the GTCNI, for instance, 70% of principals felt that the inspection encourages compliance but not innovation, and it was overtly data-driven. What's your thoughts about that? How do you reconcile those two positions?
I suppose there's some comments I'd like to make. First of all, I mean, ETI have no issue with GTC NI reflecting the professional views of their members, but we have genuine concerns about the methodology and reliability of the survey. And, you know, I make no apology for challenging the survey that I think was flawed in its methodology. And that was confirmed by NISRA, who are the statistical experts. For example, no form of identification was needed. The survey was open to absolutely anybody to complete openly on the website. Anybody could complete it. There was an opportunity for multiple entries. There was no checks and balances in the survey to make sure that it was no safeguards put in place to reduce that risk, shall we say. There was no random sampling. There was the use of leading questions. And if I just give you an example of a leading question, which perhaps demonstrates sort of the very point that you made. The question was, the inspection process has an inbuilt social bias in favour of socially advantaged schools, because insufficient account is taken of context and intake. Now, that was considered by NISRA to be a leading question, so there is only, according to NISRA, you know, you're led to give a particular answer. So I have real issues about the outcomes of the GTC NI survey, about its reliability, as have NISRA. So I'm content that our own survey was carried out by NISRA, was carried out under the best statistical principles, and therefore what's in our survey is absolutely fair and accurate. And it is the feedback of those schools that have been inspected. So it's a post-inspection survey that's carried out each year.
Would you have any concern about perhaps the leading nature of questions on the NISRA survey? Or are you are you happy with those?
Well, no, because those are NISRA validated questions, if you like, so they subscribe to the best principles of best questions. Yeah. So no, I have no concerns.
You seem to have a problem with the reliability of the GTC, and fair enough, leading questions, all the rest of it, but the people who respond to that survey are people with an interest in the subject. They're professionals. May be slightly troubling that it's anonymous from what you say, but it doesn't mean that people don't give an honest view. And that's such a diametric difference between what comes out of one set of professionals and what comes out of NISRA. I mean, the other ones that I spot here are that up to 45% of principals felt that you didn't explain the inspection criteria and didn't accept evidence-based challenge. And the other one, which come across a lot, was only about 30% of principals felt that the inspection took account of what schools produced in terms of value added.
Well, you know, I've explained to you my concerns about the reliability of the survey, and those
Did you think that all those answers are produced by leading questions?
Well, there were positive comments in there as well, so
yes.
There were positive comments as well as the comments that you've described. But I think what I would say is, while I have concerns about the validity of the survey, I do accept, you know, that we need to consider the themes that came out of the survey, and some of those themes would not be unknown to us from other evidence that's come through to the committee. But I mean, if you look at our own survey, which to me is robust, valid and reliable, it says that, for example, the school had a good opportunity, 86%, to brief the inspection team of the context of the organisation, that inspection helped the school plan and promote for improvement. 81% felt that the team was courteous and approachable. 93% courteous, 87% approachable. That, you know, they felt they had a good quality of service from the inspectorate. 80% felt that. 80% felt that they were treated fairly. So, you know, to me that is valid and reliable statistical evidence, but it doesn't mean that everything is perfect and that we don't have work to do, which is why I've outlined, you know, the development of inspection work that we're undertaking over the next period, so that we can be even better building on the good practice that we already have. So I accept that there are areas that we need to improve.
There's another external report. This is the one from EMQC Limited, And that, if I remember right, has given you a highly complimentary and a gold standard report for, I think it's the last 13 years. What's the mechanics of EMQC Limited and how they evaluate your organisation? What do they actually do? I mean, I presume they visit schools.
Yeah, well, we inspect a range of providers. It's the Customer Service Excellence Award, and they look at a whole range of characteristics about how we, provide information to those that we inspect, how we actually carry out the process, and the impact of that process. So they have a set of criteria that they measure us against. And we've just had a full re-evaluation of our customer service excellence in February this year. And, again, we came out very strongly through that process. So I think it is a very thorough and robust process that looks at how well do we deal with our customers, i.e. those that we inspect. And as you say, it came out extremely positively.
Is it the fact that when they visit the school as part of their assessment that they're accompanied by a member of your team?
I can't remember whether they're accompanied or not, but certainly I suspect somebody does go with them as a courtesy, but the assessor will be carrying out the interviews with those that they are visiting, and they will be making their own determination. It is an absolutely independent charter mark, or whatever you'd like to call it. And we have no interference in that work other than to provide the evidence and information that the assessor requests.
What we have been told is that they're accompanied by a district inspector when they go to school.
Well, I would hope they're on unfamiliar territory. Our assessor is from England, that we would drive them wherever they need to go. But
well, do you not think that would perhaps colour the reaction of the school? I mean, I could draw an analogy, I'm sure, with some other type of follow-up inspection where the organisation who is actually being assessed is present when people are being asked questions about their performance. It doesn't seem, that's...
Well, I'm sure the organisation would have something to say about your comments. I mean, it is an absolutely independent assessment. The assessor makes their independent judgments. The Customer Service Excellence, EFUM, whatever their initials are.
Do you pay for that service?
We do, yes.
Is it expensive?
It's in the submission. I can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's sure, exactly. We could probably refer you to the submission that we've already put in, but it's not a huge amount of money, but there is an expense attached.
Well, I've made my point about the fact that they are accompanied. Well, if they have, to me, if somebody's following up on your performance, they really shouldn't have a member of your team present while they ask questions of the people who've been inspected. It just doesn't seem necessary or add any validity to the whatever outcome they come up with, and they have come up with a fantastic outcome. It seems to be for every year that this exercise has been carried out. You'd think there might be a blip along the way somewhere, but no, there are 13 gold medals.
Well, we do a good job, Mr. Lund, so I don't find the outcome of that surprising. But I mean, we've had partial compliance on some aspects that we haven't complied with over the years. And this year we had, 2 of our partial compliances were made full compliances, so we're, moving even closer to getting that absolute gold star that you talk about.
Yeah.
But it would be disappointing if you were saying that because that was a glowing report, it was in any way tinged with ETI influence. It absolutely isn't. The assessor makes their own professional judgment about the quality of service that we provide to our customers, and it came out very
Trevor,
strong.
can I just maybe to help here?
Yeah.
The man from Marsland and looking at the process, right? And this is what EMQC has said in their own report in relation to the process. So if we listen to this and determine as to whether or not there's objectivity in this, because remember that was the issue in relation to the district inspector. On-site assessment visit started with the assessor meeting the Chief Inspector, Assistant Chief Inspectors, Managing Assessors, Assessors, reviewing documentary evidence and meeting with customers of the service and observing service delivery inspection service branch. On the second day, the assessor accompanied the District Inspector on visits to customers and meet a selection of customers over a buffet lunch and met with the lead officers in the Department of Education. Could you write over that objectivity?
Well, I'm disappointed to hear you say that, because I can tell you that the process is completely objective. But what you haven't read out is that there was practically a whole day spent in a telephone conversation with our managing inspector who leads on this process. We did a self-evaluation for the Customer Service Excellence Award, so that was the first bit. Then there was a sort of a telephone call where he quizzed the managing inspector on our self-assessment. And then on that first day of his actual visit in Northern Ireland, he discussed aspects of the self-assessment report with us. And on the following day, he went out and met some of the customers, i.e. the people that we inspect. So I do believe that it is a robust process and that it was objective.
I think it's fair to say, as we would say about our own inspection process, that that's one element of the evidence that is collected by the assessors looking at it. And actually, we haven't had it for 13 years. We've had it since 2007, and it was hard won to get it. By 2007, we actually didn't get customer service excellence the first 2 times we applied, and we had to work very hard as an organisation to actually get it in 2007. But it's not a repeated process, it is a continuous improvement process. So it is, as we said ourselves, about looking at what we've achieved and then trying to build on that successfully over a period of time. So in that sense, there is a lot of additional work. And obviously the questionnaire returns are part of what is submitted as part of that. And really what the assessor is doing then is going out to sample some of the skills. But I think, absolutely we can share that with them, that perhaps we shouldn't be part of that discussion. But I would have to say it is one part of the evidence only that is considered in that particular instance.
I think we could, right, Chairman, we could talk around it all day. I mean, it's the same contrast between NISRA and GTCNI as between EQ, whatever, MC, and GTCNI. And I'm not convinced that with your assertion that the GTCNI responses are coloured by the fact that they're leading questions, or the people perhaps have a bit of a grudge or something like that. I mean, we're talking about professional people here, and they, one of the witnesses we had recently described himself as a fan of ETI actually, but indicated that in his opinion the inspector had a degree of organisational arrogance. I know that's a catchy phrase, but that was his words, not mine. You think that would explain some of the adverse commentary, perhaps that's in the GTCNI survey, or that we have received as a committee? Because there's been a thread running through this from the day we started, that there's a contradiction between what you say and what the professionals say within the schools and the system.
I think probably John wants to come in there, but if I just sort of respond to the question you made. The analysis of the survey was carried out by NISRA, so it's not my views, it's NISRA's views as the statistical expert that it was unreliable. So that's the first thing. John?
Yes, I just thought it might be worth adding a few percentages from the GTCNI survey. You've quoted some that suggested they're very out of line with what's found in the annual NISRA survey of those who have just been inspected in the previous year. Obviously, the GTC inspection is open to anyone, whether they've been inspected recently or not. NISRA, when GTC responded to NISRA's critique of their methodology and extracted the returns from principals as opposed to the teachers, it might have been more open to whatever, but the principal has a greater oversight of what's happening in the whole school than any one teacher might. They might see part of the process, but not the whole process. It's interesting that while the NISRA positive percentages are in that range that you mentioned of 80% towards 90% of those who've been recently inspected, in the GTC survey, some of the returns are of interest. If you take, for example, inspectors provided appropriately detailed feedback in relation to inspection criteria, 68% agree with that. The inspection has been central to later improvement. 70% of principals agreed with that. The inspection took appropriate account of our own context and our own intake. 69% of principals agreed with that. The inspection process took appropriate account of our own school self-evaluation. 77% of principals agreed with that. And the inspection process took appropriate account of the range of practice in our school, again, 77%. So, you know, my view about that is they're good figures. My view as a managing inspector is they're not good enough. And while they come from what are evidence-based, clearly we'd want to improve on some of those percentages, and they're not as strong as NISRA's, but they're not that dramatically apart from the NISRA responses. They're lower, but they're not significantly lower. And I just think it's worth looking at the figures in that way as well.
Yes, so they did say in their survey they were an approval of the system, but you know, fair enough. I've taken certain statistics from what they said, but I mean, in a way, their survey is only a reflection. I keep going back to it of what we have heard from virtually every organisation talking about your organisation, you know, whether it's unions, teachers, individual schools, the GTC, they all, there's a theme running through it. And that's,
I think we've indicated that we have work to do on addressing perceptions so that we are better at explaining the role we play, and Professor Gardner said that really very clearly last week, that we need to focus on explaining how we contribute to improvement so that it's better understood than it currently is. And that's...
I think, you know, as John describes, there are some myths around inspection, and that is absolutely something that we must do something about. But the NISRA post-inspection survey, which is the schools that have, schools and providers that have recently been inspected, largely in the high 80s in terms of its response. So actually, you know, when we carry out an inspection, for the most part, it is well regarded by those who are part of the process. But there's no doubt that we need to improve our wider perception of how we carry out inspections.
yeah, well, I'll leave it at that. You know, there's a fine line between fighting your own corner and defending your performance and organisational arrogance. That's the term I don't particularly like.
Well, I would hope that that is not the case with ETI. I think we take our work and the feedback that we receive very seriously, and the improvements that I've outlined that have been in train, particularly since 2011, are improvements to work in greater partnership with those that we inspect. And I think if there is an underlying message coming through this, that's it.
I think that's it indeed, yeah. Thanks very much.
Well, would it not have been helpful, Noel? Because as outsiders watching it being played out in recent days, it's been interesting to see the reaction that there has been to some elements of this inquiry. And this survey from GTCNI has been a typical example where there was an exchange of emails between yourself and NISRA, and if you read it in the context of what was going on, you would have concluded, or you could have concluded, that this is only about trying to basically rubbish the GTC survey because it was uncomfortable, as opposed to the explanation that John has given, which has said, look, there are many things in this survey that, you know, that are we recognise, and we accept that there are things that need to be improved. If that was the context or the tone of the way in which the queries and questions and concerns were being raised, I don't think people would have been as exercised as they were, because what they are seeing is a very adverse reaction to all of this. And when you see the drawbridge being pulled up, you just wonder who's inside the castle. What are they trying to defend? And I think that if we are saying there are things we need to address, we need to be open, and we need to do all these things, sometimes the way in which we go about it is as much an evidence that we are genuinely concerned about the issues that are being raised.
Yeah, I'll just repeat what I said. We're an organisation of great integrity, and so we take all of the evidence and information that we receive on that basis. But as I said, I do make no apology for challenging a survey that was flawed in its methodology. NISRA, who are the independent statisticians, said that it was flawed. GTC are entitled to take the professional views of their organisation, but we have and remain with some genuine concerns about the quality of the survey. But as I said, some of the broad messages I think we do have to take on board, and we are already beginning to work on those aspects as I've described through the development of inspection work.
Okay. Robin?
Thank you, Chair, and thank the members for coming up. And I think when we met on the Balls Road a few weeks ago, I said to you that my background was investors and people and national vocational qualifications and so on. So I've got a slightly different cultural approach, I think, to inspection. But I have to say that when I was in that work, I always held ETI as one of the paragons of inspection. And I'm saying that now to you. I do want to explore with you maybe a couple of things, and I think Faustina had referred to Scotland's experience, and Heather had indicated she'd been in Scotland for a period of time. And I think, Noel, when you were giving your introductory remarks, you'd indicated that inspection is not a one-dimensional approach. Schools have a role to play. I think the evidence in Scotland is that there is a much stronger focus on the cooperation between the schools and the inspectional process. And maybe that's true in other jurisdictions as well. How might ETI develop a more two-way collaborative approach to inspection?
Well, I might ask Heather to come in and talk a little bit about what she observed in Scotland, but I think we already work in partnership with those that we inspect, but what we've identified is that we could do that further. I mean, we have the pre-inspection visit that the reporting inspector carries out, where they will go to great lengths to explain the inspection process to the principal and the staff of the school, and to set up the inspection so that it works for the inspectorate and for the school. For example, in post-primary, there's dialogue around, which classes will be followed as part of the class pursuit on the Monday. So there is quite a lot of dialogue that happens before the inspection to set up the inspection in a way that works for both. During the inspection week, there's a lot of, as John described, professional dialogue that goes on with all of the staff that we meet. We meet with pupils. We feed back to the principal and vice principal each day to make sure that they're aware of the emerging issues. But what I have described is that we can take that a stage further and get the principal more involved in our team meetings. And that's a challenge for us and a challenge for our inspectors, because that's not happened before. But I think that will help the principals to be clear about why we've come to the conclusions that we have, and to help them to better understand the areas for improvement. So I think that will help to do that. I mean, we have the dissemination of inspection good practice events, and those are incredibly successful, very well attended. And they're an opportunity for us to explain the inspection process, and also an opportunity for principals to see practitioners who have been through the inspection process and have been identified as having good practice, demonstrate that good practice to others. And of course we have the district inspector role, which is the same inspectors that the next week might be a reporting inspector working with schools. So I think there is already a lot of activity going on to join up that process.
Is that a change in process or a change in culture?
Well, I think they're not mutually exclusive, I would say. I think our culture from our perspective has always been to be open and transparent in the work that we do. I think what some people are saying is they would like us to be more open and transparent, and that's what we want to do. So it's more of, not that we don't do it.
You said John might want to comment.
Heather, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Heather.
Members, chair and members, my experience in Scotland was actually being in one school, in a primary school, so therefore my experience has been prefaced, as I said, by that conditioner. What I would say from the outside is certainly there are similar processes. They are robust, rigorous and fair. The key emphasis on what the children learn, the extent to which they learn, their entitlement to, in that case, the Scottish curriculum for excellence, just as we would look at the Northern Ireland curriculum throughout primary and post-primary as well. Looking at it, I mean, I've had the experience of both being a former principal and equally from being an ETI, and I know if I were a principal, I think I prefer our model, but that will, you know, we're welcome to your advice and to recommendations of where our inspection process goes. Certainly from a principal's accountability aspect, it is very intense over the 5 days. The principal would be involved in different meetings, but an essential difference in primary would be that the principal and the senior leadership team nominate joint lesson observations. Now, that would be a new departure. District inspectors do that at the request currently in ETI, at the request of the individual principals in schools, negotiate it with the teachers. But in the Scottish model, in primary, that is a component, and that's part of the two-way process, Robin, that you were talking about. There would need to be a lot of negotiation with our unions and equally training and principals to accept that, again, this would have to be, if you were thinking or if you have heard through your research aspects of Scotland, I think it would have to be a made in Northern Ireland version as opposed to adopting a simple version. So from that accountability, there is a higher stakes in the Scottish model for the principals' experience and understanding of what makes high quality learning and teaching. Certainly, on the Monday, the first day, there is a scoping exercise. We rely in primary on the school development plan for the evaluation, as you were told on the meeting in the West Belfast Partnership headquarters. We rely on the school development, and it's been alluded to as well. Those are the compliance aspects of school development planning. In Scotland, prior to the inspection, there is a self-evaluation pro forma, and in that document, the school nominate, and again, this is a two-way negotiation aspect of it, the school nominate 3 areas they would like the HMIs to actually observe, evaluate and track throughout the inspection, as well as all the curriculum areas. As a result of that, whereas we in primary tend to, and post-primary, the teacher would be visited once a day. In Scotland, the teacher can be visited 2 or 3 times as necessary to obtain the first-hand evidence in the classroom observation, to look closely at the learning. An area which we have talked about is the running record that's being trialled currently in post-primary. Certainly the record of inspection finding, it's known as the RIF. That is a document that is left with the school. I think it's about 2 weeks after the inspection, as Festina explained. The accumulation of the evaluative statements about the quality of learning and teaching under 5 key indicators. That is shared on a confidence basis with the principal and the senior, the local equivalent to our CAS officer on the final day of the inspection, on the 5th day of the inspection in primary. It is then edited, obviously, and then it's sent to the school. But as opposed to transparency, there are almost a quota of people or a restriction on who can actually access that. It is very detailed. It mentions specific teachers by year groups. And therefore, that's why I say there would need to be an evolutionary stage for us in Northern Ireland to agree to that form of reporting on individual teachers without the teacher being there and being written in a written document. So there are questions I have around that, actually from a former teacher and principal, how that would be used. It's kept within the chair. It would be similar to our Board of Governors. It would be the chair of the parent forum, the principal and the local education officer. That is very useful. And as John noted, schools would find that very beneficial to move it on as an improvement document. I certainly think that there are issues there about transparency and who would obtain that. The parents get a separate letter which focuses on 3 headings under how well do children learn and achieve, how well does the school support children to develop and learn, and how well does the school improve the quality of its work. And then there is a concluding statement, and there will be 4 of those in which it tells the parents whether there be no further inspection activity, additional support for improvement, continued inspection, which would be equivalent to our follow-up process, and then innovative practice, which would be equivalent to our very good or outstanding schools. There are similarities, there are equal challenges there, but focus is very much on the learning, and from a Northern Ireland perspective, there would have to be association, as I said earlier, between principals, teachers, and what will be about, what happens with the record of inspection findings and the confidentiality over that. They do have indicators, by the way, similar to ourselves, from outstanding, where we have outstanding to unsatisfactory. They have such things as good, weak, satisfactory.
Okay. Can I also explore with you, because in this situation where you're moving into support for schools or intervention, and I think, again, when your opening remarks, Noel, you indicated that formal intervention should be supported by CAS. And the evidence that is being presented to the committee suggests that CAS services are being wound down and that schools are deprived of the necessary support to help them improve. And is that, and obviously our objective is to improve for the pupils, as you outlined, and that's what we're all dedicated towards. If that, and I take your comment, formal intervention supported by CAS, then how would we see that in a situation where CAS support is not as supportive or as extensive as it has been previously?
I think it's well recorded, that there has been some changes to the CAS service, and where they focus their activity now is in the schools that are in the formal intervention process. And you'll see that in our follow-up inspection reports that we will always make reference to the quality of support that's been provided by CAS to those schools in the formal intervention process. And I think it's fair to say the support is usually good. That is what we normally see. But there is only, it's like everywhere else, there is only a certain amount of resource to go around the schools, and currently it is focusing in on those schools in the formal intervention process. I described that there were, broadly speaking, 10,000 pupils in schools that are in or were in the formal intervention process, and there are now 5,000 pupils that are in better schools as a result of the support that's been provided through the formal intervention process. So, there are clear examples of improvements having taken place to the quality of pupils' learning as a result of that supportive process.
I think the difficulty is something that we're, in a sense, storing up for ourselves at the moment, as Noel has indicated. I think there is sufficient support at the moment to help those schools which are in the formal intervention process, and all of the CAS services prioritise those schools.
Sorry,
on the other hand,
did I pick you up right? You think that there is sufficient?
Yeah, just to support the schools that are in the formal intervention process. That certainly is what our CAS colleagues would tell us, that they prioritise the schools which are in the formal intervention process. Nevertheless, what Noel said in the last Chief Inspector's report was that, particularly at post-primary level, once you get to a stage where a school is in the formal intervention process, that decline in standards and that downward trajectory has become almost endemic. You referred to culture earlier, and therefore it is actually quite difficult when it gets to that point to turn things around and to improve things in a quick period of time. But every School a Good School does outline the importance of support being in place before a school gets to that point, and I think that's where we have a piece of difficulty at the moment, because the support services are prioritising the schools that are already in a difficult situation, but really and truly as a system what we need to be looking at is ensuring that schools don't get to that point in the first place, because I think the amount of time that has to be invested then in actually trying to improve things for everyone in that situation is difficult. And I think our colleagues in CAS would say that that is where they would struggle at the moment, to try and provide that support before you get a school to a point where it is in crisis, really. And I think that would be a hugely important area for us to say that needs to be addressed as well within the system.
So I think Jonathan's whispering in my ear.
It's just on that point, Christine. As John well knows, I've met with him on issues around all of this. The one thing I will say to you, in my experience, I can only go by my experience, when you talk about adequate support, one thing I will say to you is I have noticed in the past year the support officer has changed 3 times on the board to our school. I don't think that experience will be much different to any other board or any other school. So there, in my mind, there is definitely an issue with the changes in resources that are going on within boards. Now, that does have an impact on the level of support you actually get from CAS, and I think we need to bear that in mind when they say there's adequate resources. If there's adequate resources, I would have expected more support than what I've actually seen. So, you know, I just think we need to bear that in mind with the running down of boards, with the potential of something replacing them. There has been a gap opening up there. I can clearly see it, and I'm not the principal of the school who is relying very, very heavily on that resource. So I think we need to be careful about saying we believe there is resources there. I think they're struggling to provide those resources. That's just my personal experience of it.
I agree, but that is outside our control, and I think, you know, if there is any influence you can exercise there to support our colleagues in CAS, I think that would be of huge benefit to the entire system, because we are seeing that, certainly we're seeing, you know, and as I say, I think people are doing a valiant job to support the schools that are in the formal intervention process.
But they are struggling, I can see that.
I think that's fair.
Sure, thank you. I mean, Faustina, I mean, you'd be aware that the OECD report made some commentary around ETI and CAS as well. I think it's along the lines Jonathan was talking about. Can I ask you about the English and maths outcomes? You've recently engaged with, I think it was 20 schools with poor English and maths outcomes. And is that ETI is now engaging with schools with numeracy and literacy issues? And does that indicate, is that indicative of beginning to review the methodology, and that we're maybe now more looking at a CAS type approach rather than an intervention type approach?
Well, in terms of the project to support the 20 schools, 10 in English and 10 in maths, that is a new area of work for us. And what was identified, and I agreed with, is the level of expertise that our English and maths inspectors have. I mean, they are, you know, the level of expertise that they have in their subject is superb. And what this does is it provides an opportunity for them to disseminate that expertise, if you like, on a one-to-one basis with the schools. So what has happened is in the last few months we've undertaken baseline inspections in each of those schools to identify what are the areas for improvement. And those inspectors are now going in sort of on a monthly basis, supporting the heads of department to implement their action plan. They are going to be supported by two expert practitioners, one each in English and maths, and where it's identified that there are sort of collective areas to be addressed, they will be running workshops which all English and maths specialists will be invited to. So it is a new departure for us, but it has been cautiously received at the outset, but well received now. I think that it is in train, that it is providing, you know, dedicated support to those schools.
I'm right in thinking that falls under the CAS type approach then?
Well, it's a very much a supportive process and something that we have not done before. I mean, it's an extension, I suppose, of the interim follow-up activity that we do and the district inspector activity that we do, but it is different in that it is targeted, dedicated support to those schools.
Thank you, Chair.
Jonathan?
Yep, thanks, Chair. And I'll start off by declaring an interest because I'm Chair of Board of Governors of a school that is subject to your inspection at the minute. And I want to start off by paying tribute to John, because I'm a firm believer in working with you and not against you on these issues. And John, in fairness, went well and truly out of his way to actually attend the Board of Governors meeting a number of weeks ago, about a month ago in fact. And I want to pay tribute to him because that was one of the most useful meetings we ever had on the issue of how to improve the school. That said, John, there was actually ties in with a subject I'm looking at here, which is value added. And that was part of our discussions that night on how do we actually measure value added. Figures, and there's a lot of figures floating about within a secondary school in particular around the performance of pupils, and you and the other inspector were able to quite clearly tell us how there was a methodology on how you can actually track the progress and see the value added within pupils. It might do no harm to maybe indicate to us that there is a method of actually doing that. But the thing that struck me in all of this, whilst there's a lot of information floated about on performance in secondary schools, do you think there is the same level of information floating about in a primary school? And if there isn't, how would you track the value added in a primary school situation?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment, but it's misdirected. I would really say the District Inspector, John Murray, is the person who's worked most closely with
Oh, I know he has, John, but I appreciate the fact that you were there too.
Thank you. We did discuss, as you indicated, how would a school understand whether it was effectively adding value for the pupils. In other words, to put it more in the language that we use in Together Towards Improvement, how are they making progress by building on their prior learning, and how are they achieving their potential? That's the language of Together Towards Improvement. Value add can have technical reason and explanations which just are not necessarily as clear as that. We talked about the information the school has on the intake to the school in terms of the level they might have achieved at Key Stage 2 assessments. And while many schools will say that that's a crude measure, they don't feel they can rely upon it enough, it is nevertheless the one in which government funds are invested in terms of providing those levels, and the levels of progression are the ones that are currently being embedded in schools. In addition to that, schools use a number of other diagnostic and standardised tests to add to the information they have on each individual pupil. So the cognitive ability test, the progress in English, progress in mathematics tests, and other tests as well. Schools vary in what exactly they choose, but those are the most common. And they also use predictive data from a university provider, Midgis and Yellis, they're called. In other words, they predict based on the test what those people should be expected to achieve by Key Stage 3, and then again what they should be expected to achieve by Key Stage, the end of Key Stage 4 in GCSE. And the key to success in the school, understanding whether it's providing sufficient individual support, is to bring that basket of test measures together, to add to them the teacher's own judgment, who's working with those pupils day to day in the classroom, because that's the most valid of all the assessments that the teacher has, the judgment of each pupil, and to add together the school's knowledge of the circumstances of that child, what barriers outside the school is that child having to overcome, what's his or her attendance rate, are they subject to suspension or low levels of disruptive behaviour. The more the school can bring together a basket of information about a pupil, the more successfully it can intervene, and it's a word that carries no baggage in the school, in supporting a pupil if they seem to be behind their expected achievement. And then additionally they can ask themselves what else they need to do to try and help those pupils do better than the expected level by Key Stage 3 and by GCSE. And that's the success of that is what will determine how successful individual pupils are, and that has to be the school's first priority. There was discussions along those lines, wasn't it, that we had in the Governor's meeting that evening, helping to unpack the understanding amongst the governors of how the senior leaders in that school and the middle management, the heads of departments and the coordinators for literacy and numeracy were effectively supporting those pupils. And the history is, without going into too much detail, it would identify where we're talking about. Over the recent period, they'd significantly improved achievement in English and mathematics. And the broader issue was, how could they use those improvements to lever improvements across all of the subjects, since after all, literacy is the language of learning and mathematics is essential as a numeracy in being successful in a number of other subjects. Is that helpful?
Well, that's helpful. That explains how we do it on the secondary situation. But John, what is your thoughts around where that leaves a primary school who maybe
Perhaps
doesn't have the same?
Be the best person to answer your question.
Yes, John, I think it would be very similar to what John has explained as regards process. In primary, from the child enters in year 1, there is a transition record from the preschool. and that gives evidence on the 6 areas of the curriculum, the pastoral well-being of the child. That is analysed by the Year 1 teacher. And then over a 2-year period in the foundation stage, that's years 1 and 2 in primary school, the qualitative data would be built up. How does a child learn to read? How successful are they in acquiring number? And that is the qualitative evidence that the teacher would have. In primary, we would also have MIST, which is the Middle Infant Screening Test, and that determines levels of responsiveness to reading text and also writing. So there's a qualitative build-up in years 1 and 2. In years 3 and 4, and then through to 5 to 7, a lot of primary schools, or almost all primary schools, I would say now, are using what we refer to as the Progress in English and Progress in Maths. And those measure the children's attainment, what they attain in English and Maths from year to year. And that is tracked on an individual basis. It's tracked in cohorts, and it's also tracked across the whole school then. And then there's also, some schools would administer a non-reading intelligence test, and that would measure the potential of a child. And most schools are comparing similar data and saying, well, are we doing a good enough job here? They are taking their qualitative data from the child's reaction on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, or over. In some schools, there's a rigorous monitoring and evaluation of progress in the individual. In certain cases, as John said, individual targets are set for children. Children are involved with their own learning targets. And it is the quality of the teaching is so important that the programme in the class is designed around it. We can't escape the high-quality teaching. It's using that information to make a difference for every individual child. And those benchmarks are available within the primary school. We also have the levels of progression, which sets out over the communication, which is English and literacy in the wider field, and also on Maths currently. And that sets almost like a province-wide benchmark of progression through those topics.
Yeah. Interesting, and it leads on to a number of questions around all of this. You can, you've indicated how you can sort of measure the value added that is added to a child throughout both primary and throughout secondary. Now, the fear out there, and it has been expressed time and time again from just about everyone who has given evidence to this committee, is that there is a artificial, target-driven based system around inspection, i.e. we must get to this level here, but there are schools and children out there where their level starts off so low that it is a massive achievement to get them to this level, and it may well be impossible to get them up to the artificial target that is out there. Is that taken into account by yourselves?
I think in my opening presentation, I said that progress is an important determinant in our evaluation of achievement and standards. And I think progress or value, added value, as you describe it, can lead to a judgment that's, on the face of it, out of line with the say the GCSE outcomes for similar schools. But schools have to be able to demonstrate to us that they add value to their pupils' learning. And I think, what John and Heather have described is we absolutely take into account added value when we make our evaluations. And schools that have been through the inspection process know that that's how we work. And I just wonder how many of the submissions that we've had are schools that haven't been through the process and have a different perception of how we carry out inspection. But you've described that we take account of value added, and Heather and John have described very well how we do that. So that is, as part of our communication, perhaps that is something we need to communicate more widely. John?
2 points, if I may. The Chief is right, of course, but the point is, as I've indicated, we're really interested to know how well the school knows that the pupils have added value. The second point is, and I referred to it earlier in the answer to Chris Hazard's question, we are required by the department to report on the school in terms of the targets set out in the programme for government, which are set by the executive. So 5+ GCSEs, including English and Maths, 7+ in a grammar school, would be the prime target that people would regard in the programme for government. And we are obliged to report on that, and we do report on that in every report. But if the only focus that we made in that report was on whether they were achieving that magic number or not, we would be doing the school a lot of disservice in terms of recognising the extent to which it serves all of the pupils and with a whole ability range within that school. An unintended and undesirable outcome of focusing on only one government target would be the school, in order to demonstrate that it has achieved it at a certain level, it's whatever the government has set, would focus on moving pupils who might attain a D grade over the boundary into a C grade. And that's all very well and good because they've raised standards. But they may well do that at the expense of the more able pupils in the school who attain a B but should get an A or an A star, or the lower ability pupils in the school who obtain a G when they should have attained an E, because an E would provide them with a progression pathway into apprenticeships and training, for example, whereas a G would not. And so while we have to report on the programme for government targets, we look at a whole range of assessment measures in the school to try to ascertain, depending on the makeup of that community in that school, how well that school is serving its particular community. And that is it requires professional insight, it requires professional judgment, and it requires knowledge of actually how the community in that school is made up. And that's where the strength of our district inspector's knowledge of the school comes into play. And I do think the misapprehension occurs because schools see we have to report on a standard of programme for government, any 5 English and maths. But they don't realise, perhaps, unless they've been involved in the inspection process recently, as the Chief indicates, that those other measures are important to make sure that the school is doing its best for everyone in the school, and not just for those who, if I can put it rather bluntly, would make the school look better.
I think that's a big issue out there. It's the target-driven approach doesn't necessarily indicate the value added that the school is actually providing for the pupils, and that goes right across the board, Chair. It also leads me into another area which I need to ask you a few questions about. That is the actual reporting, and the way the initial report is actually worded, and this is something which happens because we're all guilty of this. We all get a report this thick. What's the first thing we do? We look at the summary, and in the case of your inspection report, you look at the last page, and they're really, when it's the press in particular, there's only one thing they're looking for: that final word that is used. Now, the press has damaged and destroyed many a good school out there by the reporting of that. So I want to know, what is your thoughts and opinions on that? Because you're very, very limited in the wording you can use. And as John well knows, there was a heated argument about this in I suppose the moderation meeting, as you called it. I thought that was an amusing term. There wasn't much moderation in that meeting. But anyway, the wording, what's your thought on the wording? And is the way it is worded at the minute, are you happy with it, or should we move to something which better reflects the fact that there is a fundamentally good school there, but there is need for improvement?
I think there's been a lot of internal and external discussion about the performance levels that we use. Although it is fair to say it was before my time, those performance levels were set. The wording that we use, outstanding to unsatisfactory, were agreed, after a significant consultation with a whole range of stakeholders. So, that's how they came into being. But that's not to say that we don't need to look at the wording and the performance levels going forward. And we've already done some work on that internally, which we've shared just in the broadest terms with the teaching unions and the associate assessors. And what we're looking at are more statements, not just one word. Some statements around possibly the 6 performance levels. The feedback we get is that they are still considered relevant because they are able to schools are able to demonstrate improvement, whereas if we had fewer than that, it's more difficult for a school to demonstrate improvement. That's where we are currently, but we're certainly looking at more statements in terms of the performance levels that we award rather than words, and we're also looking at the overall effectiveness evaluation performance level that we use at the moment. Would that be better written as a capacity to improve judgment, more linked to the self-evaluation process? Do we think the school has the capacity to, through its self-evaluation leading to improvement, to improve? So that's where we are. We're not there yet because there's still considerable work to be done, but we're certainly having that discussion and dialogue.
I just wondered, well, is there an acceptance amongst yourselves that an awful lot of, I know it's not you didn't create the system, you have to live within it, but is there an acceptance and a realisation of the damage it can potentially do to a school?
Well, I mean, we have to report without fear or favour as we find. All of us in this room have one focus and one interest, and that's improving the quality of provision for learners, and we will always have to do that. In terms of what happens with the inspection outcome once we report it, that is out of our hands, and if there's anything that we can do jointly to sort of moderate the reporting of that more widely in the media, then that would be beneficial to all, I guess. But Jonathan, we can never walk away from saying that provision is not good enough, but making sure then that through the supportive process, from our perspective of the interim follow-up visits and the follow-up inspection and the district inspector activity, that we do our bit to support the schools to improve the quality of provision, which I hope you're demonstrating that we are doing alongside our CAS colleagues.
Yeah. No, well, if we're asking the press to take part in all this, I think we're in a hiding of nothing. Bad news sells papers, unfortunately. They never ever sell good news. The likes of Scotland has reviewed this and come up with a completely different wording in all of this. Has that been looked at, Noel?
Well, the wording in Scotland, as Heather described, is almost identical to our current wording. They have a letter that they write to parents which doesn't have the performance levels in it, but is put on the website. And then they also have a more detailed document that does have the performance levels attached to a series of indicators, and that is on the website right alongside the parents' letter. So they do report exactly as we do at the moment, except that they have the separate letter that goes out to parents. But if you look at any school and click into it, you will see the performance levels 1 to 6 attached to that school.
1 to 6, but do they use that emotive word, satisfactory, inadequate?
They're very similar. Heather probably has them there.
Yes.
They use weak.
Yes, they still, the inspectorate in Scotland, the HMI, still make the call on the standards of the quality of the learning and teaching in school. And that's a separate document. The wording for the letter to parents, I've read them out, no further inspection activity, additional support for improvement, continued inspection and innovative practice. That's the wording that would be sent to parents. But as Noel has pointed out rightly, there is a separate sheet that stands alongside that gives quality indicators of weak and satisfactory. So they still make the call on the overall standing, benchmarked against the across Scotland, similar to what we do in Northern
but
Ireland.
that is interesting. Weak and satisfactory.
No, they go from...
No, 1 to 6.
Yes.
There are 6 levels.
6 levels.
6 levels.
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
and I can't remember the exact wording.
Weak
but it
would
is
be equivalent to or inadequate.
very similar.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say.
They may be equivalent, but do they actually use that word inadequate?
No, they equivalent to our inadequate would be their weak. They use the
Yes.
word weak.
You understand why I'm asking this? Because language, I find, around education in schools is incredibly important. The difference between a parent making the choice to send a child to an inadequate school and a weak school is massive.
I think it's
You
fair
may
to
well
say,
make
though,
the decision to send your child because you know the school to a weak school. But once this word inadequate is used, you start to ask all sorts of questions. I would ask the same question myself as a parent. If this school is labelled inadequate, why would I ever send my child there? So that's why I'm saying, are we looking at that specific word that's used? Because it has all the wrong sorts of connotations which don't necessarily reflect the school at all.
Yeah, I mean, we are looking at the
Yes.
performance levels and we are looking at the language because that is the feedback that we have had. And, you know, work is in progress to do that. It won't be one word is the direction of travel we're going in at the moment. It will be a statement. But nevertheless, whatever the wording is at the end of the day, we will still have schools that are better performing than others. The language might be different, but, you know, the reality will be the same.
And I think we accept also, I mean, everything is of its time. And if what you're saying and what we're saying is that in some instances what people are doing are reducing the inspection report to the one word, which doesn't say that the school is inadequate, it says the quality of the that's how people interpret it, and I fully accept what you're saying in that sense. I think as former teachers ourselves, no one wants a pupil even to look at what it says at the end. You want them to look at the annotations, you want them to look at the areas that you've identified within the body of it. And if schools are not using that information effectively from the report, then it does start to become counterproductive. And I think we have to take that into account. And maybe we might even be ahead of Scotland in terms of taking that into account and reviewing it. I like to think that we can do things better here, as opposed to that we would just emulate what other people do. But I think it is, I mean, I think what you're saying is accurate insofar as when we introduced the 6 performance levels, we did do an extensive consultation with the system, but times change. And at that point in time, there was absolutely not the same press interest, for example, in inspection reports. And I think it was done with the right intentions in the interests of transparency, but we accept that at this point in time, it is something that we need to review, and hopefully we will be in a better place with that.
Thank you, Chair.
Danny?
Thank you, thanks very much. And please, at any time, I know inspection is absolutely vital, and so any sort of questions or more from a negative point of view are all meant to be helpful. One of the matters that really bothers me is how you assess before you get to a school. Because you've talked about objectivity, and you've talked about greater partnership, you've talked about dialogue. It's how you assess whether the school has had time to do all the things that we're asking of them. So it's more the longitudinal process of studying on the schools. So what are you putting in place to make sure when you get there that the cuts that are coming in, all the massive paperwork and assessment systems that are being put in place, and the lack of time for training to actually do the training that they're meant to be doing, what do you put in place to ensure that they can do it and that you're assessing them fairly, if I put it that way, against a system that is cutting and cutting more and more and making their lives busier and busier? I mean, most teachers I'm talking to, or principals, seem to be working to midnight almost every day.
Well, you know, I accept that, you know, jobs in education, like many others, are demanding. There's no doubt about that, and principals do the job because they are absolutely committed to improving the life chances of young people. But in terms of what do we do about it, well, you know, as we come back to where we started, really, you know, the school improvement and the sustainability of school improvement rests with the school. And the most important fundamental thing that a school can do is carry out effective self-evaluation. That is a process, not an event. And through that, they can identify the priorities that, with the resource and the time that they have, that they can identify and improve. And I think that is fundamental to both the school improving, and it's also fundamental to the start of our inspection process, because we look at the school development plan and the self-evaluation process as part of our inspection process. And of course we have, you know, we've talked about the district inspector's role in supporting a school if they need some help with the self-evaluation process, although, you know, there's also other support through the CAS offers. And actually, schools themselves, post-primaries in particular, get good support through the area learning communities where you know, aspects of good practice are discussed and shared.
Yes, I touched on this in our recent meeting a fortnight ago. District inspector knowledge is key to this. The district inspectors now receive the annual data pack, which the stats department team in the department produces for the Board of Governors on every school, so they have that. And also, in their link with the school, they'll be aware of what the school's current work on its school development plan priorities are and how its action plans are progressing. And in addition to that, sometimes specialist inspectors there's limited times you've heard, but nevertheless they would have time to make some visits in schools, and they will always make a record in our database of their visits, so that the district inspector and the reporting inspector, when it comes to planning an inspection visit with a team, can look back over all the information that's available to make some sort of assessment. This information is important to us because it feeds into our proportionate risk-based approach. Schools aren't selected randomly for inspection. There's a percentage which are promoted based on the time they're due for inspection, and also an assessment of some of those risks that are contingent on the performance of the school. If we need to look at the school earlier than we might normally, then we will promote it in the inspection schedule. That information is the kind of information that allows us to make the assessment that you're asking about.
Do you from that is there a feedback system? I know you can feedback to us as a committee to question the Minister and all the policies that are coming through. Is there a feedback system that allows you to say we need more resources or district inspectors to actually put the process there so you can do your job as effectively?
Well, we have a business planning process that takes place each year where we talk to each of our commissioning departments, because we don't just inspect for DE, we inspect for DEL and DCAL and CJI and lots of other departments and inspectorates as well. So it is through that commissioning process that we would identify the resources that we need.
Okay, and if I turn it slightly, I mean, we had a comment from someone the other day, does it have to be like this, was the quote, which really refers to the stress that is often the perception of the inspection system. And sort of what are you putting in place to try and get rid of the stress factor? Because part of it is the area of planning, part of it's the viability audit sort of loaded onto the back of you, not necessarily with your agreement. But what are you putting in place to try and take the stress out of it so that the moderation becomes a softer process?
Well, we have a lot of guidance, and I think that has been alluded to, available about the inspection process. We also have the role of the district inspector in liaising with schools around inspection. And we have the pre-inspection meeting, which I think is important in outlining how the inspection process will take place during the week. But it isn't just our responsibility to take the, if I can use your word, stress out of inspection. It is actually, a big responsibility for a principal. And, a principal said to me, when the letter lands on my desk about inspection, my first job is to, to tell the staff about inspection, say, inspectors are not looking for anything that we're not already doing, because we're not. That is absolutely what we're doing. We're just looking at what a school does normally. And it's their job to make sure that staff aren't stressed. So I think it's a joint role in terms of making sure that the inspection runs smoothly.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to a different thing, which is the use of questionnaires. Do you accept that questionnaires, in the way that they're used at the moment, can be used to either abuse the system or to exacerbate problems that are in the system? That there is a mechanism there for people who decide that they either don't like a teacher or don't like the system, can actually load the system by their comments.
Well, we have worked, I think, very hard to refine our questionnaires and our questionnaire process. Each questionnaire the teacher has to identify themselves through their teacher number. Support staff have to put their name on the questionnaires. So there is that check and balance that they are authentic in terms of submissions. But we use the questionnaires to determine lines of inquiry. We don't use them absolutely as part of the inspection process. And I guess there will always be in any organisation some people that for whatever reason are unhappy and want to have an opportunity to highlight the issues that they have. But I think we take a very balanced view to the information that we get through questionnaires and use them as lines of inquiry.
Yes, 2 points, if I may. We need to recall that the vast majority of parents and teachers' responses to the questionnaires are highly positive. They appreciate the school, they affirm the school, they like having their children there, they like working there, and they believe the school is doing the best job possible, the vast majority. So in the sense that they're not, as portrayed, sometimes as gripe sheet. The second point is, if issues emerge and they start to be significant, rather than the odd negative comment, if they start to be significant, there's a number of comments around the same issue. First thing we need to know is the school already aware of that? Is it already conducting its own questionnaires with parents and with staff? And is it aware that there are issues? And if it is, how is it managing those? That's the line of questioning that we would inquire, rather than, we do not set out to investigate accusations or allegations that are made. That's not our role. It's the role of the principal of the school, the governors of the school, and the employing authority of the school, not for the inspectorate. Our interest is how well is the school managing issues, how aware is it of views of parents and the staff about current life and work and a successful life and work in that school. And I think we would stand over absolutely the right for parents and staff at the opportunity of an inspection visit to have the right to provide their views in the way that we do. But I want to set it in that context.
But would you encourage them then to use third-party questionnaires or to use outside systems?
Effective schools do. Effective schools already do that, and the interesting thing for us will be in an effective school that knows its community well, and its staff, internal community and external community well, is any issue that we might say has come up in a questionnaire is absolutely no surprise, and they can tell us what they're doing to address it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
John, you just want it briefly, because I'm very well aware of how time is marched on.
Very brief.
Very quickly.
Do you actually correlate some level of internal complaints? Because I think you will, no matter what questionnaire you'll use, you'll pick up internal politics that goes on in any school amongst the teaching staff. Have you ever correlated that with the performance figures that you also look at around some of the teaching staff? Because to me, there is a very interesting correlation sometimes between the complainants and the performance issues that adversely affect the school.
Well, there may be.
Is that taken into account by yourselves when you're doing your overall report?
When we have the response summarised for us and sent to the reporting inspector, the first thing the reporting inspector does, and he or she does it on the monthly, they'll discuss it with the principal and the senior leadership team to ascertain the questions I mentioned in answer to Mr. Kinahan. And secondly, they'll share it with the governors when they meet the governors as well. See if the governors are aware of the issue. And if it does point to an area that needs to be investigated that falls within the inspection, because some issues raised don't. Let's take a real example. More often or not, the question about careers education gets the lowest score if you look across all the questionnaires. And the reason for that is parents may often be discontent that their child didn't make the career direction that they wanted. And they therefore might score careers education less highly because they believe if the careers education guidance had been better, their young person might have had a better career pathway. We would then say, okay, there's a number saying this. Discuss it with the school. Are they aware of that? Secondly, we inspect careers provision, and we're able to say conclusively or not, as a result, in our view, whether actually it's just a concern that some parents, the child didn't get the career that they wanted, or the job they wanted, or the direction they wanted, or indeed there is a weakness in the careers provision that we've evaluated independently from anything that parents might have said, which merits further discussion. So there's a way of illustrating the question. We can look at them if it points to an issue that needs inspection, but we don't use the answers themselves as first-hand prima facie evidence. We use it to prompt a follow-up of our own evaluation.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to focus my question maybe on parents. And I note the committee submissions from Parents Out Loud and Sir Robert Salisbury, which highlighted the concerns about the limited parental understanding and engagement with schools and school improvement. Can you explain why the lack of understanding of the inspection process and inspection report is so poor amongst parents?
I think Parents Out Loud, that was the first engagement we had really with any parental group in Northern Ireland, and I think we would like to engage with parents more. I think that's definitely one of the things that we think is important. I suppose we have information on the website that is designed for parents. My school is, I'm a parent and my school is being inspected, so there is information available on the website that parents can access. We would also expect the school, when it is being inspected, to inform parents that it's being inspected and to send out requests for error. And when the inspection is complete and the report is published, we ask the school to send the inspection report out to parents and confirm that that has happened. So I think those are the things that we have in place to engage parents as well as obviously the parental questionnaire, which we highly value during the inspection process. But I think I would agree that we do need to engage more with some parental groups around the inspection process, informing them about inspection. But one of the things that came out of that parental engagement was how the extent to which parents value inspection, and I think that's really reassuring to me that inspection is highly valued by parents.
It has been said, Noel, that this is an example of organisation arrogance, that the ETI has not taken the trouble to explain itself to key stakeholders, and in this case parents, and that is certainly a worry, and that's something that I'm hearing through my constituency. When your inspectors arrive at school, can you maybe rank for me their priority in terms of who essentially they're there for? Are they there for the teachers, the principals, the pupils, or the parents? How do you see your role? Are you there primarily for?
I suppose just to go back to the point you made, I mean, if your constituents have ways that they would like to engage with us as parents, you know, we'd be really interested in hearing that feedback, because I think it is an area of work that we wish to take forward. We are there to promote improvement for learners. That is our purpose. We are there to make sure that
The pupils?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But in that, we recognise the role that teachers have in making sure that pupils have high-quality teaching and learning, and also the role that leaders and managers have in ensuring that all pupils are getting good teaching and learning and the outcomes that they deserve in terms of their life in the school. But you'll know that sort of the key principles of every school, a good school, are around leadership, around good teaching and learning, and absolutely engaging with the community. So we would be very interested in hearing how the school engages with the community. I think that's an important aspect of a good school.
I recall, I can't remember how long ago now, but some years back, we did have a period of time we engaged in evening meetings with the parents of a school that was due to be inspected. And we discontinued that practice for a couple of reasons, and one of them was that the turnout for parents was so small that it was simply not worth the resource for a small number of people. So I would reiterate what the Chief says: any opportunity we can be offered or we can find to meet with parents groups, as opposed to what we already do, which is meeting with governors on a routine basis when we're inspecting. We would welcome to taking that opportunity. And indeed, at the moment, we're about to be involved in the second round of meetings presenting to governors about the role we carry out in inspection and how we look at the governing process and the degree of support and challenge offered to the school through the governors.
Well, I'm glad to hear that pupils form the central reason for the inspections when the inspectors arrive at the school, and I very much welcome the opportunity, as you have said, to engage with the parents and the feedback from parents. I think
Yes.
hope you don't regret that, but I certainly will
not at all.
pass that on to parents that have contacted me. That being the case, and taking the position of a parent reading through a report, do you feel that you have a long way to go to presenting your findings in plain English? That it seems so overly complicated. Parents want to fully understand what you're saying about their school and how the school is performing in their child's education. So would you agree you have a way to go to present it in plain English?
I believe that communicating clearly is a work in progress all the time. No matter how well you might think you're doing it, there's always a scope to improve on it. I'd like to think if you looked back 5 years ago to inspection reports, you'd find them clearer now than they were then. But that doesn't believe there isn't scope to bring even greater clarity and simplicity of language. I noticed an example given by Professor Gardner when he spoke to you. Some of the language he used I don't think would appear in a report, but others would. So I'm not sure we'd use the word familial. I'm not sure I'd explain it easily. But we do talk about curriculum breadth, and we do assume that people know what that means. And perhaps we need to explain that, you know, in even simpler ways. And it's my constant work to see if my colleagues can communicate the findings in a way that makes it clear to parents not only what evaluations they've come to, but how they came to them. In other words, that they do stand over the evidence, and that is, going back to a very early part of our meeting here, part of that process of quality assurance. Very often the issue is, apart from ensuring consistency from team to team, that actually the report communicates clearly the evaluation the team came to and the evidence that they based that on, and that is, for me, continued work in progress.
And we do spend a lot of time talking about our reports and the structure and how we can make them clearer. And I think, in September we did a sort of a revision of our reports. And I hope, as John says, that people think that they are clearer, but we could never be done, I suspect, in
We produced a
improving
new
clarity.
we produced a new editing guide as part of that, for example, so we have better consistency. But one of the challenges is our reports are read by a very wide diversity of different audiences who all want different things from that report. And I think one of the challenges when we're writing it is trying to say something that would make sense to an advisory officer, to a department official, to a parent, to a teacher, to a pupil. They all want to read different things.
But it is essential that parents can understand what's in it. I think there's a way to go to make it easier to
Well,
understand.
if it's clearly communicated, it should be clear to all those audiences, which is the objective.
And that can probably lead in with, you spoke about parental engagement, so you would be keen to facilitate parental engagement
definitely.
again. So do you believe then, final point then, do you believe that the district inspector should play a larger role with parents, obviously, with communicating concerns of our schools? It's important to get back to that, helping to explain self-evaluation to parents, because they are still baffled and left in the dark with it. And
Well, we still have a finite resource that we can't stretch it, to everything. But certainly, I would get letters from parents. Parents would write to me about aspects of their school's provision. And although we can't investigate individual complaints or concerns from parents, in all cases those letters would be copied to the district inspector, and they would pick that concern up on their next visit with the school in a very open and transparent way, so that the principal of the school would be aware that we had this letter and have an opportunity to explain the circumstances. So that happens all of the time. So, we do pick up on concerns from parents that come directly to us.
And you did say, Noelle, at the start of your presentation that our inspections are only one dimension, so obviously that getting that information out, that building up that relationship with parents is vital, that they can understand it. It's not just purely inspection, it has to be, and particularly around self-evaluation, it has to be, there's no point if you can't communicate that successfully with the parents, that they do feel involved with their school, that they're passionate about, and they are.
And we do see good engagement. You'll probably have heard this too. I mean, good engagement with parents in schools, where they will take groups of parents in to talk about various aspects, and it might well be to include their views in the self-evaluation process. That would be good practice to do that. So the schools also have a responsibility, for making sure that parents are clear about, how the school operates, and indeed self-evaluation of what the priorities are for the school. And we see schools will often send out a synopsis of the school development plan or their self-evaluation to parents, so that they are clear about those priorities. So it is a sort of a joint relationship that we need to develop.
Written into the regulations of the school development planning, the consultation with parents, children, governors and community are essential aspects of it. So therefore there should be an ongoing annual and at least every 3 years feedback to parents and parental involvement in the creation of a school development plan. And if a school is not doing that, then you have to ask about the communication systems within the school.
Well,
it is essential.
In my experience, the communication system with schools and parents is usually very, very good.
That's good to hear. That's right.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Sean?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.
It was the morning whenever we started.
As somebody that's going to another education inquiry at 2 o'clock, I'll be brief. First of all, in terms of, in February you mentioned about the unions, so there was minor industrial relations landscape, there were certain issues there. Is it a fact that in 2011 and 12, about 10% of the inspections were not finished and were back to the following year?
We did have the action short of strike that was taken by the teaching unions, and that was nothing to do with inspection as such. The reason for the action was around the discussions that were then ongoing about pay and conditions, and inspection was used as the vehicle to articulate that concern, if you like, and we did have non-cooperation in a number of schools. What we did was we carried out the inspection activities that we could carry out in the time that we had scheduled, and then we came back and completed those inspections a year later, so they are all now complete.
Do you believe the industrial relations unions, that whole context is very crucial to the school leadership, to the school inspection process as well?
I think so. I think in relations with the unions have improved, over the last, well, since the action short of strike was suspended. It's actually never actually been formally called off. But I think we have regular meetings with NITC, which is representative of most of the teaching unions in Northern Ireland. And I think we have good dialogue. We don't always agree, but I think we have good dialogue now around aspects of inspection, which would be the area I would be interested in.
Okay, then I'll just look quickly just at school self-evaluation. OECD mentioned that in terms of school self-evaluation, that the department maybe could do more to embed self-evaluation school. What's your comment on that?
I think, more can always be done to improve self-evaluation. We have now got the revised TTI in 2010, which I think supports school self-evaluation better. We've also got the new regulations for the school development planning, which embeds self-evaluation as part of the process. So I think there is a light being shone on self-evaluation, which is helpful. But I think we can always do more to support the process. The fact that in post-primary it's absolutely key to the inspection is important.
It is central to the inspection, Sean, but it's also the one measure on our evaluation of schools which is the least effective. The action to promote improvement is the underlying action planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Allows the school's priorities to be turned into practice. It is the weakest area, and it's almost a half of schools in the last 2 years that we'd evaluate as less than effective. It's better in primary, but I would argue that's because post-primary schools are more complicated organisations. So the answer has to be yes, there's a lot of work to be done to promote the effectiveness. All schools engage in, but the effectiveness of it and bringing improvement is possibly, arguably the highest priority.
But do you think that also would come back to Joanne's point, would that also help the link between parents and schools as well, to have they would have robust information year on year then? It would help that process as well. And would it then, if it was well enough embedded in the schools, would it slightly change the whole inspection process?
Well, of course it would. As we've always described inspection as coming alongside self-evaluation, and the schools which are most ready for inspection, if you like, as if it could happen tomorrow without any real anxiety, are those that have a really effectively embedded self-evaluation process, because they're already engaged with the quality indicators and the evidence and the process that we bring to the school when we carry out our inspection visit. And that's where real stress and anxiety would be reduced. Schools that have that do not have that as part of their working culture, who only engage in it because of a looming inspection. You can see there where there might be higher stress as a consequence. They're not, if you like, inspection ready at any time. And obviously an objective would be that because they're sufficiently well engaged in self-evaluation, any school should be inspection ready.
I suppose the real question then really is, what can ETI do to build the capacity for school self-evaluation?
Well, we've been asked that before, and the answer is really we take any opportunity that we can to contribute to helping promote the use of our self-evaluation process to get towards improvement and understanding of the language in it. Some people say they don't understand the language in it, or they're not familiar enough with the processes, and we will take any opportunity. And again, on a school-to-school basis, that can best be done through the district inspector. But we look for other opportunities and other events that we can create. With other agencies, regional training unit, for example, the point has been made that perhaps that whole process should have a much higher profile in leadership development, both at middle management as well as senior management level.
And there's also the area learning communities, which I think certainly post-primary principal value, there is the opportunity to share sort of good practice around a whole range of things, including self-evaluation.
Okay. I've heard, in terms of an answer to Robin about the CAS service and so on, I've heard the expression, it's outside our control in terms of, obviously school inspection, school improvement, school development, staff development, high quality staff development, the provision of it is a major concern. But you say it's outside your control, the fact that they cut so much of the budget. And also, to something you said, John, in terms of levels of progression, is a programme of government, but it's a crude measure. And, you know, I am particularly concerned about that because we know they're very crude measures. But really, is your role in the inspectorate compromised because you're part of the department?
No, I mean, I've responded to this question before. We are embedded in the department, but our judgments and evaluations that we make are made without fear or favour and without any interference from the Minister or anyone else. So in terms of the judgments we make, the evaluations we make, they're completely independent. I've said to you before, I have experience of working in an NDPB, and I also have experience of working in a non-ministerial government department, and now I have experience of working in ETI, which is embedded in the Department of Education, and there is no difference in terms of our operational independence to be able to make the decisions that we make about inspection. There are benefits, I suppose, from a financial perspective in that, you know, we can share human resources, we can share finance and so on. But in terms of our decisions, we are absolutely independent in the decisions that we make about the quality of provision in schools and all the other areas we inspect.
But then, if the likes of levels of progression are crude measures, and I'll just illustrate one example, a child level 4 communication could be somewhere in terms of standardised score between 95 and 125. A score of 95, a child needs immediate intervention. A score of 125 is a very, very competent communicator. If these are crude measures, then why can you as an ETI not do something about this with the department?
Well, I mean,
to get a better measure?
I'll come into to John in a moment, but certainly if there are aspects of any part of the learning journey or experience that we find there are issues with, we will report it. You know, for example, we carried out the ETI evaluation of the computer-based assessment arrangements. That is one example. And Faustina very much feeds into discussions around the levels of progression. But we know there are complications around the levels of progression in terms of getting some agreement around the moderation. But I think we all fundamentally agree that the teacher's input into being able to determine the stage that a child is at in their learning experience is really fundamentally important. But there are some things that need to be addressed around the moderation process. But I think the principle we would sort of subscribe to is right.
The level of progression, of course, let's remember we're only in the second year of teachers' experience across the whole system of using them. We only had the first use of them fully across the whole system last year. So they're still, in a sense, bedding in, and they're broad, perhaps, rather than crude. You know them well, so you indicate the breadth within there. They're a broad measure. Schools express anxiety sometimes to us about whether the levels reached at the end of Key Stage 2 for all of their contributory primary schools are consistent or not, whether Heather would want to comment on that or not. The issue is, I've indicated in an earlier answer, you never depend upon one single measure. I mean, I do think that, broadly speaking, you know, if a pupil is at a certain level at Key Stage 2, you ought to expect they can reach a certain level at Key Stage 3 and a certain level at GCSE, and the school's job is to add value to that. In other words, that they do better than expected. That ought to be the school's mission. But you wouldn't use that measure alone. You use teacher's judgment, you use other assessment measures, and you use your knowledge of the pupil and pupil's background and the barriers that pupil has that need to be overcome in order to progress and to build on their prior learning. And I do think our language around there, as already indicated, is a much more helpful way of looking at this than value added.
Yeah, but unfortunately, parents and schools are driven by what's in league tables and whatever else. And once schools see that their schools below the Northern Ireland average, it does cause problems. And, you know, some of that data could be possibly skewed as well. Do you not think it's a major problem that needs to really be addressed?
Well, by whom? I suppose I'm asking You can clarify by whom. I mean, I've indicated what we do in inspections because we have to report on Programme for Government target. We don't limit ourselves. That would be a very narrow and, data like that is not a conclusive view about school. You know, very broad range of learning experiences and improvements that pupils make as they progress through the school. So we know what we're doing to look at the school in the broader sense. We work within some government statistics that are provided to benchmark that school, and if there are ways of improving on those government statistics, we will work in that context because that's the government context in which we work. But you have heard rehearsed throughout this inquiry the difficulties of getting anything that might actually be more effective, that doesn't have negative consequences.
But we have a role in raising expectations too. We know that one of the things that enables a child to be successful is a school having high expectations about their achievement. So comparisons with the Northern Ireland average, I think, help to do that. They're not the only thing, as John says, and they're not the only thing that we take into account, but they are helpful in terms of that message that high expectations is important.
And I think it is fair to say as well, particularly in the primary sector, it won't, we will have plenty of instances of inspection reports where it may say precisely that those outcomes are reported factually. They're not making an evaluation of those outcomes. They are reported factually if they are above or below the average, so to speak, or if they are above the median with regard to free school meals as a comparator. But you will find many examples in the primary sector where it may say below the average, but that does not mean that achievements and standards of those pupils are evaluated as satisfactory or less. It very often will still be good overall, because what we look at is everything in the school, as John has indicated. In primary, we're looking at the end of key stage results. As Heather has indicated, we're looking at the progress in English, progress in maths, but most importantly, we're looking at what happens in the classroom. That ultimately is the thing that we do that no one else actually has the privilege of actually doing, which is observing what is happening firsthand in the classroom and marrying that with the teachers' planning and with the assessment processes that are ongoing in the classroom and the work in the children's books. And in the primary sector, I think that is often nearly easier to do because each class has one teacher, as opposed to in post-primary where you have a spread of teachers. But in looking at all of those things holistically and collectively, that's where we make the evaluation. And I think that is much fairer than a school simply being part of a league table, in the sense that we have had what looks like league tables published in the primary. But we would never use any one of those indicators on its own as a way of evaluating achievements and standards in the school. That doesn't mean to say that as we've talked about this morning, that the perception is different to that, and I think we still have to work at clarifying that so that people feel that they are really being looked at in that rounded way. But they are. They really are.
Okay, then why are the draft inspection reports then shared with the department?
They're not. No.
They're not?
They're not.
They're not.
No.
No. What would go, the only thing that will ever go to colleagues in the department is if a school is likely to go into the formal intervention process, when we do the report back to the school, what we would call the oral report back before they receive the final report, we leave an A4 piece of paper which sums up the strengths that have been identified and the areas for improvement. Those are left with the school so that the school can get on with the action planning process and work with the support services to begin to address any of the issues that have been identified. So we also provide that same information to the department, nothing else, simply that one page that the school is in receipt of, so that again that process can be enacted as quickly as possible, because in every School of Good School, you'll see it says that the school must provide a management response within 30 days to the department, and therefore to try and give each party the information. That's what we will pass on to colleagues in the department, but we would never share a draft report. That it goes to the school for factual accuracy. That's the first time that anyone will see that beyond ourselves.
And we also tell the department right away if the school has we've evaluated the school as unsatisfactory child protection. That's the other thing we communicate immediately.
That's the other area.
Thanks for clarifying that. Why do the ETI have a role in terms of development proposals in area planning?
Well, there are 6 criteria, as you know, to determine the sustainability of a school, and one of those is the quality of education. But our input into that is only one part. We would give a factual outline of what we know about the school from inspection or through the district inspector process, but we have no role or no locus in making any decisions around area planning. It's purely one piece of information that feeds in a development plan.
The district inspector would summarise, for example, the most recent inspection evidence, the inspection history of that school, and that's provided as a memo to that division in the department. And if there are implications for other schools nearby, it would point out that there are other schools enrolling pupils from the same conservatory primary.
But could you see how that particular practice could actually damage the professional independence of ETI?
No.
It's a factual record. You know, it's a factual record that's provided. It's nothing else other than that, and it is available after the development proposal is.
Only the inspectorate can tell the department what the quality and effectiveness of the educational provision in that school is. So that's what the district inspector do. They will summarise what's been said about that school through inspection evidence.
And we've always done that, even when there hasn't been the whole emphasis on area-based planning, because as John said, we are the professional advisors to the department in that way, and colleagues within the Department of Education then are free to either accept, reject or ignore our advice. I mean, that is in fact, I think, as it should be, but we will still offer that advice, and you know, it is up to the person who is looking at all of the advice, as Noel said in the round then, to make a final decision. But I think in actual fact, if anything, it is more likely that is something which is going to be supportive of the school, because we have the first-hand knowledge of the school and of the quality of education provision in it. So on balance, if you were looking at it, I think that would work more favourably for the school than be likely to be adverse in some way for the school.
Thank you. Time permits me for going any further. Thank you.
Chris, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just quickly, I want to touch on Irish medium education. I think most of us were quite surprised to learn that inspections were taking place with inspectors with, let's just say, less than proficient understanding of immersion education and use of Irish. Just looking your view on this and what is being done to address this situation.
Well, we have 42 of our inspectors who are mainly undertaking school inspection, and of those, I think it's about 14% actually have Irish as one of their language skills. And
to what level, sorry?
Well, there are various levels. I mean, we have fluency, and we have people who have A-level Irish who are...
How many M6 are fluent?
Well, it depends on how you determine fluency, I guess.
How do you determine fluency?
Well, we have people who can undertake observations in Irish and who can converse in Irish and who can understand what's happening in the classroom in Irish. So that would be the lowest level to those who are fluent in Irish. But we have 6 inspectors that we deploy effectively on our Irish medium school inspections. And as I say, that's about 14% of our provision. The Irish medium schools make up, I think, is it 2.7% of the schools make up. So I think what I'm trying to demonstrate is that we have got the skills and expertise within the inspectorate commensurate with the number of schools that we've got in the Irish medium sector. And we also, I mean, you will always have those inspectors also inspecting in English medium schools, because the Irish medium sector is part of the school's landscape. It's not apart from it. Therefore, it's important that the standards that we see in English medium schools are consistent with what we see in Irish medium schools. And we spend a lot of time actually in terms of providing training for Irish medium inspectors in terms of language. We have a very joined up process with the South, and we will have inspectors going we'll have them, the South have a sort of a summer school where they talk about inspecting Irish medium education and also conversing in the language of inspection through Irish, and our inspectors attend that. So we have you know, a good staff development programme for those inspectors to improve their skills.
I don't share the same confidence as yourself with regards to the percentages. We could have 1,000 inspectors, you know, for Irish medium, but if they don't have that level of understanding of immersion education, well, then it's still no use. Is there any scope to work with the South in maybe inspectors from the South working in the North to inspect schools? Is there any scope for that? And also that, again, despite the explanation given here today, the representatives of the sector do not have any confidence whatsoever, and they made it very, very clear that day that they want to see attention put onto this, and I don't think the committee could do anything but empathise with the situation. Certainly when it comes to full immersion Irish medium education as well, I think we're unique here in these Isles in that it's English-speaking inspectors going in to inspect full immersion schools in the North.
We will always have an Irish-speaking inspector on the team, at least one, if not more. So, you know, please be reassured that that always happens. But in terms of your question about, you know, doing more joint work with the South, yes, I've discussed that with the Chief Inspector in the South, and I think we're both open to that. What we need to discuss is whether the legal landscape will allow us to do that, but we are actually both very open to doing that joint work. We already do the North-South exchanges anyway, and in fact our agriculture inspector has gone down and carried out inspection in the agricultural colleges in the South because they're just starting to do that work. So, you know, that's sort of, I suppose, paved the way for that sort of exchange and interaction to take place. So yes, I'm very interested in pursuing that.
Yeah, I think it is important that we focus on it. You know, I don't think we'd tolerate someone with A-level English who was German to come in and fully expect to understand the whole scope of our English-speaking schools, so I don't think it's the same sort of equity should be applied.
Well, I think what I explained, Chris, is that that's the lowest level that we would have, and then we would have people who go up to full fluency. And we've just actually recruited in September a new fluent Irish-speaking inspector. So we're adding, you know, to our resource as resourcing will allow us.
Okay, Trevor, you want to come in on this point?
Is this not a classic situation where the role of the associate assessor could be brought into play? Bring in an associate assessor from another Irish-speaking school who is fluent?
And where we do that, where we can do that, we do. But you will know that the Irish community is actually very close, you know, quite closely knit.
I think there's enough of them out there that
we have got associate assessors in Irish, and we do use them without a shadow of a doubt. But in some cases there are conflicts of interest, you know, where it's just not possible. But we do use them where we can, and we have got them. Yeah.
And we need more. Yeah. I mean, we will appoint people who apply and who meet those competencies at interview. But we would also encourage, you know, people from the Irish medium sector more of them to apply for associate assessor roles, because we have struggled in the past with recruitment, and I think that would be really helpful if we could get more people to actually apply for the post as well.
Okay. Robin, you have one final question.
Very, very quickly, Chair.
Just a conclusion.
Yeah, you know, we had a meeting with the district inspectors, and there were a number of features or a number of points made in the discussions that we had around their role and their ability to visit. And I think they were quoting something like it could be 5+ years before they actually get a chance to visit the school. I just wonder, and you'd made the point about CAS is outside your control, is there not the potential to use the district inspectors to help a school in a pastoral role, I suppose, and help the improving school, rather than concentrating on inspections? Is that not perhaps a more constructive role than an inspection role?
Well, I think, you know, I mentioned earlier that 14%, in fact, if you include the work that district inspectors do with the follow-up inspections, 21% of our resourcing days, available days, is used for district inspection. And what they do at the moment is they challenge and support schools outside the regular inspection process. And that is really beneficial and very useful. But at the same time, we need to carry out the inspections of individual schools and institutions to give a broad view picture of what the quality of provision is like. And Joanna's mentioned, you know, parents value that information about schools. So all of the time, we're trying to balance those two resources. You know, I know that district inspectors carry out good work in the schools that they are able to visit, but we only have a certain amount of resource to be able to do that. But at the same time, the actual institutional inspections are really important too. So, you know, we need to balance that up all of the time.
And I think you have to really look at being very clear about what people's roles and responsibilities are. You know, I think to just go into a support process from the point of view of ETI would be something that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. I mean, Professor Gardner spoke to you last week. He would have seen the two things as being very separate and distinct. And I think an inspector gains the expertise and the experience they have, first and foremost through being a teacher, but then through the broad experience you get in visiting so many schools and seeing so much practice and beginning to see how those standards actually work across the sector. If you are working only in support, you know, that again, you're not, on what basis are you supporting the school? It has to be on the basis of the knowledge and expertise that you've gained. So I think it is being very clear about what you would be doing in that particular situation, as opposed to that it's just an easy move from being an evaluator to being someone who is offering support. And I think, you know, in the same way as our colleagues in CAS are trained in actually providing support, I think you have to be sure, and there has to be clarity around the role that you're actually carrying out. I'm not saying that but what I'm saying is that there would need to be a very clear strategy that outlined either way, either that we were evaluating and providing some sort of support, or not, as the case may be. But I think it can't be just a slipping in and out of one to the other.
Members count with the PAC has to be in here for 2 o'clock, so we are really under pressure in terms of time.
I'm part
Sean,
of the PAC,
yes, so
it's very, very quick.
but unless the inspector wants to stay and because with the PAC, that would be fun.
It's a very, very quick one.
Quickly, and then Joanne, and then we can.
When you talked about the Irish media, could you just clarify whether, in terms you said there was one of the team had Irish, is it one has has some Irish, or is it one is fluent in Irish?
So at least one of the team will be highly proficient in Irish. At least one, and it could be more. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Finally, in your submission, you say that most inspection teams include associate assessors who, as we know, are practicing principals, vice principals and senior managers. Obviously, they will have considerable experience. Are you not concerned that this creates an inconsistency in inspection outcomes?
In what respect?
Well, you say most, you don't say all inspections, so, you know, it's at most.
Well, it's a logistic point.
Yeah.
In a small school,
But to be consistent.
for example, where there may only be 17 teachers. I'm talking about post-primary, a very small school. I mean, the team has to be kept at a reasonable level. So you don't want to swamp the school. So
I understand. I'm just thinking from a constituency angle, and I understand that you have over 200 associated assessors. How many are you using at any one time, or what are the percentage of inspections teams include associate assessors? Obviously, you've alluded to smaller schools.
Leave Heather to comment in primary, but in post-primary, for example, there are 3 inspections underway this week, and there are associate assessors on all of them. And in one team, there are 2.
Okay.
That would be similar in primary, where they're available. They're not always available because they have responsibility in their own school, and they also have periods, for example, at Christmas time with school plays and productions and carol service. They would not be available the week that we would be inspecting. So it's a by mutual agreement that they would be on the team.
And it's a mutually valuable experience. I mean, we as inspection teams, and where we can, that is what we will do. And they find, I'm sure that you heard from them, they find value in being on the team too. So
Also, it's worth adding, since you're asking about this area, that we're always looking for ways to develop the role of the associate assessor. And in one instance already, we would intend to have more when on the follow-up inspection. The associate assessor who was on the original inspection, if available, may be a member of that team, so we get more consistency and more involvement of AH right throughout.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Noel, Christina, Heather, Joe, thank you very much. It's been a long session, but I think it's been very productive and worthwhile. So
thank you very much.
I'm sure you look forward to our report and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Adjourned.
29.